I am going to be starting the stream. It seemed like sometimes it starts the stream a couple seconds before. But all right, we are live.
Yeah, you just got a little loud there.
Oh,
John.
did I? Sorry. All right, we're live now with the Bevry community. And today we're going to be discussing John Vervake's 10th lecture from, I hear my echo in one of you guys's. His 10th lecture on awakening from the meaning crisis. This one centered on consciousness and what consciousness is. My name's John. I'm joined here with Sumit and Pleasure of Doubt. And I think Sumit only has like 1 hour, so he might be jumping off a little bit early.
Your YouTube stream.
Oh, huh? Let's see. There we go. Yeah. All right. So yeah, we can jump right on board on this. We have our notes, but I don't know, Brett, do you want to go over kind of some larger elements of the discussion of the lecture?
Sorry, hold on. I'm just hearing the stream. I'm not sure if it started playing in Discord. That's why.
Oh, in Discord. Oh.
Yeah, Discard auto played. Okay, there we go. Sorry, guys. So I couldn't hear what you were saying. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's right. Do you want to just go over kind of basics what the lecture is about?
Sure. So today, this is episode 10 of John Vervake's series, and which is linked down below, and he's talking about consciousness, and I think he didn't bring in a lot of brand new concepts, but I think he sort of went into consciousness and then brought it together with a lot of the other things we've been talking about throughout this series. And so a lot of the focus is on altered states of consciousness, these states that people get in and he talks about how it can shift our perspectives. Now, most of the time with altered states of consciousness, if you're drunk or you're on drugs, we assume that it's, we wake up from it, or like waking up from a dream, and we realize, okay, well, that wasn't real, and we compare it to our waking reality. But there's these subset of altered states that produce the opposite, where you wake up from it, and even though it was sort of a singular experience that is different from your waking world, it convinces people that experience represents what's what's real, and that our waking world is actually not real. And he talks about these three different landscapes. So he starts off by talking about there's the
salient landscape.
Sorry. First, he goes through. He briefly goes through these different theories of consciousness. So he goes through global workspace theory, which basically analogizes consciousness to a computer. He goes through just very briefly the neuroscientific account, and then integrated information theory, which is Tononi's approach to consciousness, which I'm quite partial to. Which considers consciousness to be integrated information. So when information is integrated into a system, it produces a conscious experience in that system. Now, his goal throughout all this is not to solve the problem of consciousness. It's to help place consciousness within the context of insight, in terms of this sort of modal approach, this modal disconcertance that we have, where we feel like we don't know our place as an agent in the arena, and the goal of everything of this insight, of this axial revolution, as he calls it, is to help us better place our sense of where we are in reality. So,
right, that's something I like about this lecture series, is it's entirely centered upon kind of the meaning crisis that is going on, like here into today. That's like the primary motivator, and also the focus for all these other things, like connecting them to something that helps us in some way.
Right. So basically, and we'll go back through all this a little slower, but he basically describes three landscapes. So the salience landscape, which is more about the features. So we talked about the features in the Gestalt. The salience landscape is where you're picking out the items in reality that we want to focus on. So a lot of it is talking about consciousness. What it does is it helps us focus. There's so much information around, even in any one room. There's way more information than we could ever make sense of. So what our consciousness does is it brings certain information to the foreground and relates other information to the background. So the salience landscape is picking out the details to focus on at any one time. What that then leads to going down deeper, he gets into the
presence landscape, I think.
Right.
Yes.
Right. He gets into So the presence landscape. Let me just.
In the presence landscape, let's see, is more.
I had a question on. I had a question till this point. So
yeah. Go ahead.
Well, I'm just doing a summary. We're just doing an overall summary of the whole lecture,
okay.
And then we can come back if we want to all of them. So so the presence landscape is sizing back up. So where you're taking the features and then you're bringing it back into the whole network.
Kind of the interaction between you as being some like graspable is the term that he uses quite regularly. So like you look at the features of the cup, this is a thing, and then you connect the features to, or like the capacities of the cup along with your capacities in order to draw an interrelation between the two of like, oh, I can pick this up. This is a cup that has the features such that I can be able to pick it up. And so now graspable is an element to the presence landscape. And so all the other things too is like a pathway. There's features of the pathway that allow it to be walked upon that are not there for, say, like a mountainscape or something like that.
Right.
Or a wall.
And then he gets into the third landscape is the depth landscape, which is where your consciousness helps you figure out the causal patterns as opposed to just the correlational patterns. So it's our way of making sense of all this data and all this information that's around it. So his brief example is, the 2-year-old who's sitting in his high chair, and you give him a spoon and he throws it off, and you give it back to him and he throws it off. And what he's doing is the 2-year-old is figuring out the rules. He's figuring out the world. He's gaining a deeper understanding of that. Again, like you said, the spoon is something he can grasp. Mm-hmm. He's a grasper, and he can then throw it off. And it all comes together in this salience landscape, which is what we just said, where your whole putting it all together. So I am the 2-year-old sees themselves as somebody who grasps. The spoon is somebody who's graspable, and he has an in-depth understanding of that, at least just of that one understanding. Mm-hmm. And this is all shifting dynamically. So how we are and what's salient is being, he calls, co-identified with the agent arena. And so this back and forth where we're constantly shifting our perception of who we are, what we're doing, and what we're using. So it's this dynamic process. And the goal is what he's saying is if we transform our salience landscape, it means it's transforming our presence landscape and our depth landscape, and it can really change our insight, which is not just an insight into any one issue, but our insight into he calls it an insight of consciousness, that it can be a radical transformation of all the landscapes. Mm-hmm. So he talks about systemic insight.
Right. And that's where you get down to the significance landscape, which is the one in which like it kind of reframes the entirety of the others. So that allows you to see the world in a different way than you had before, in a way that's more meaningful or more real feeling than how it was previously.
Right. So that's the summary of the whole episode. I thought it interesting. I always like how he sums up last week's episode at the beginning, because he sort of brings some problems home. He talks about, mindfulness, he says, can bring about insight, not just into a single problem, but as a modal insight, a systematic insight that's fully transformative of the agent arena relationship, and it relieves existential distress. And that seems to be the purpose of all of this, is that this existential distress, that our way of seeing ourselves in this world causes a lot of suffering. And bringing, and again, he's bringing in this lecture, he's bringing consciousness into this, but it's all within that pattern. Like I think we were talking off stream that, this episode, I think, didn't bring as many big aha moments, but just help consolidate what we've been talking to up until now, and gave a lot of language to the consciousness aspect of it.
Right. And the one other thing that I also just want to touch upon is he brings in some of the higher levels of consciousness, or what is it? Higher states of consciousness, and how when people experience something like that, it enables them to completely reshift the way that they saw their entire life previous to that, and then change their actions so that they can better fulfill what they experience, who they really are, and also how the world really is. So like the higher state of consciousness changes their understanding of how the world works, and what the, I guess, like purposes and causal functions to things are in the world, as well as changing the way they conceptualize themselves, so that, I don't know, maybe like a past identity that they might have adopted in a kind of agent arena relationship becomes superseded by some new sort of identity that they can better understand and then use in order to have a different agent arena relationship with the world, or agent relationship with the arena. And the surprising thing is that after these higher states of consciousness, and this new, the term he uses is ontonormativity, which is to say like it's like changing the way you act in the world based upon your understanding of what's most real. And so onto as in ontological, and normativity as in like prescriptive actions for how you act and behave in the world. So through the higher states of consciousness, they adopt a different ontonormativity. Yeah. And they take on these changes to their lives, and surprisingly enough, get better. Like they posit that they have better relationships with people. They're happier, more meaningful lives. So it's not something to just kind of like, these higher states of consciousness can't just be dismissed as being kind of like illusory. I mean, you can say they're illusory, but they still have these ramifications to them that are beneficial and almost predictive in a sort of way, where the people prior to that were, I don't know, had this sort of feeling, and then they take on this new level of action with the world, and that new level of action with the world actually results in a better and more meaningful lives for them. You're right.
Right. And he gets at the end, and I guess we'll come to we're sort of starting at the end here, but he then asks at the end, sort of, people can come to completely opposite conclusions through these experiences. So the question then is, what is the sort of quote unquote truth? What is the reality of this? Like he switches in at the end to feeling that we feel like we have this, that this is more real than real, or people who have these are more real than real. But the question then is, what is the actual reality of it? And my question is, does it matter? And in some sense we say it does, and the other sense is if this new state makes you feel better about yourself and your place in the world, and makes you happier and more self-actualized and just feel good throughout your life, does it matter if your conception is
accurate?
True. Yeah. And to some extent, I mean, the instinct is yes. I mean, we want our thoughts to be true. On the other hand, we want to be happy, So I mean, there's a discordance here, which like I think we have. I'm not ready to sort of jettison truth, but I do often think, all this trying to figure out what's true doesn't necessarily make me happy, and
right.
Sometimes it's the opposite. So what's our goal here?
Yeah, and yeah, that's a very good point that brought up by you and Vervake, that people will enter into these higher states of consciousness and receive this kind of insight about, let's say, reality, but their insight can be completely different from somebody else's insight that also had it and affected them and made them change the way they live their lives for the positive. so it can't be, since they both have like completely differing ideas of like what reality is like, it can't be that they're both receiving like truth through the higher states of consciousness. However, it can be that they are receiving, I guess, like beneficial models maybe for themselves as a personality, or like what they need at that point in time that enable them to get out of this like broken system of thinking about and interacting with things, which which doesn't really have to do at all with the ontological reality of whatever models that they're adopting, really.
So Sumit, you were I think trying to get in.
Okay, so my earlier question, I guess I don't want to change the topic right now.
That's good.
No. Yeah, we were just going through the recap of the lecture. So yeah,
we jumped ahead, so let's go back to the beginning.
Okay, so I have two concerns. First one, interesting. What John said was really interesting when he said that change the way they live their life after this insight. And UPOD seems to like talk about this thing that they feel better, they are happy. So there is like how they feel and how they act. So like what are we like seeking here? So if I have this insight, right, I might be happier for the rest of my life. But I'm not sure if I want that, if that means my actions will be different in a way that like what my goals are. Like eventually I want to be successful, right? I want to be motivated to get things in the world. And the some of my, let's say, happier friends, they are just happy. They have nothing to like chase. So how, I mean, what's the goal? Because I'm not sure if I want to have this insight, if that means, I'll be less driven.
Well, but I guess, but that's the question, I think. But like your agent arena relationship right now is that I want to be a person who accomplishes things and gets things, and this is what I want. Now, so the question is, but you talked about the other person who's happy but doesn't want those things. And I guess the question is, what's quote unquote better for you? Why do we want these other things? Why do we want these things? Why do we want to be productive and all these type of stuff? What's the end goal? Now I think that, but there are, you have to balance it. Like, for example, a person who just sits and does happy and is happy, feels happy, but doesn't contribute to anything, will eventually, unless he has people helping them, just starve and die. So we have to, we're people who live in society, and we have to, I think, this is sort of the social contract. I think you have some duty to be part of society and not just have everything being provided for you. So we sort of want to contribute but the goal, I think, at the end of the day, is to get all this stuff so that we can, like, we need to survive, we need to be alive, and we need to function in society. But I think our goal usually at the end of the day is to have that sense of well-being. The question is, I think this is about, is how to get it. I think and your question I think hits on it. I think what Vervake is getting at with this meaning question, or this meaning crisis, is that we often lose sense of why we want the things we want. What is our ultimate goal? Why do we want the new car, the new computer, the fancy thing, and what's it doing for us? And in terms of our overall well-being. And I think what he's getting at with these altered state of consciousness is they change their perspective on what's important to them. Now, whether that's good or bad, I think it's an open question. I think for some people it can be very good. For some people, it may not be.
Yeah. And just kind of going off the back of that, like, Sumit, you brought up how, like, certain people, they can be happy not like seeking after and accomplishing their goals, and for other people that's kind of like a prerequisite for them to be able to be happy. And I think a lot of it is going to kind of work down to like, I guess, know thyself. Like what is it, like maybe like take observations of how you actually respond to things. Like, would you be happy? And like, I don't know, just in testing it out without doing anything? Or like, would you be happy just kind of being somebody that just goes with the flow, does whatever it takes, and just anything that happens to them doesn't affect them? Is that something that you're capable of? Like that, because that's the thing, like we have our different personalities. And I think like somebody that's higher in conscientiousness won't be as happy if they're not doing anything. And other people that are low in conscientiousness, like putting a high amount of burden on them and stress is something that will make them completely unhappy. And so like you can ask, like, should we be happy? Should we only do that which makes us happy? And of course, probably not. Like just what Pleasure or Doubt was saying, that we have certain restrictions to how we act. Like we have to do certain things that don't make us happy. Like you got to pay your taxes, you got to pay bills, you got to work for a living, you got to do these things just based from where we are right now. So yeah, we have to know ourselves, like what are we going to be able to accept and appreciate and work towards. And we also have to know what are the limitations of our reality. So like, okay, it is such a case that where I am in this situation, I am going to need to earn a living. And so I'm going to have to figure out a way in which to do that. And now if I can figure out how can I earn a living while also doing the things that I am capable of doing at a long term. So like, that's the thing. I can do things that don't make me happy, like it because I need to, but I can't keep that up, because if they don't make me happy to a certain extent, I will like almost automatically try to shut it up or put it away or push it off. And so you can't do, you can't do something that you're not willing to be able to do. Do you know what I'm saying?
Right. And I think well-being, I think, goes beyond happiness. Like happiness is a part of well-being, but it's not the only part. Like there are prerequisites.
Right.
Like we have to produce. If no one in society produced, society would just fall apart. Right. So we need those, and we need some people to super produce, to be super innovative and to be workaholics. I say need, but there's a use for those people in society. Society as a whole benefits because there are people like, the Bill Gates and the Elon Musk who are just workaholics and just, that's all they do. And they probably have a little social life and whatnot, but they're consuming it. And probably for them, that's very fulfilling. It's not going to be fulfilling for everyone, and not everyone has those capacities. So, again, a big theme of this, even though he doesn't use this word, is balance. I think, because he's talking about the flow, sizing up, sizing down, scaling up and scaling down. And a lot of what that is I think balance. If you're only doing one or the other, you're going to have problems. But that being said, a society, like a society can have people who just focus on one or the other and then come together to share their findings or take turns, and society can benefit from the different perspectives. So it doesn't have to be in one individual for society to work.
Yeah. And I think that's part of understanding what is the like field out there, because like the field are other people as well. So similar to like how ants, there are the workers and the drones and the feeders, the nurses, all those different types, where if there is a decrease in population of, say, the nurses to take care of the hatchlings, then there becomes this need now of the environment for new nurses to be produced. So that's kind of an understanding of like, okay, here's the area of needs that are occurring, where if this need is not being fulfilled, then society will like start to collapse, and I will be affected by that. And so consider like, okay, here's this need. Am I capable of fulfilling that need? And I don't know, you can test that out. And if the answer is no, then I don't know, maybe your role is to find somebody else out there that is capable of fulfilling that need. Because like, I don't know, if it's not made, if they are not made aware of this need in society, then they have no way of actually satisfying it.
You know, like I think I get the sense that his whole lecture is geared at creating these people who can do all of it, who can sort of scale up and scale down, and the perfect he talks a lot about optimization, and I definitely think we need some people who are well optimized, but I think it's probably also a mistake. So it's a mistake if we have no one who's well optimized, but it's probably a mistake if we have only people who are well optimized, because the person who's well optimized, I mean, there is a reality. We can only focus on so much. It's not just like all of this talk is, and it goes to global workspace theory, which is the idea of treating, you know, of comparing our consciousness to a computer, where you sort of have like your files that are contained in on the hard drive, and then you access those files. So you bring them forward to the foreground and you deal with them and you make changes to them, and then you send them back to the background. And that this is sort of how what consciousness is doing, is bringing things forward and bringing them back. But the fact is, we can only bring forward and back so many things. So having certain people who focus really deeply on just one aspect, those people will probably, you know, it's like in law, you have the specialist lawyer and you have the generalist. You know, so or in science, you have, you know, you might have a general scientist who's even, especially like a teacher, you talk about a bunch of different fields, and then you have like a scientist who focuses on one area. And that scientist who focuses on one area is not well-rounded, but they're going to get a lot more knowledge and insight and development of that one area than the person who is always well-rounded. So
and I think there's another component to that, where in order to have like the highest efficiencies between these two specialists, like you have the specialist that's focused on the details of things, and then you have the other specialist that's focused on the abstractions and the larger generalist pictures, you have to have some sort of framework in which the two can communicate to each other and pass on information across the borders. Because if you're just having people focusing on their one things and then on the others, then you're going to have two like separate worldviews that don't quite cohere, especially like if they have to interact with each other, then there's going to be like almost the Tower of Babel scenario where you can't figure things out. And so I think there needs to be that broader landscape underlying, which provides them to be able to do both of their specializations.
Right, like there's an implicit criticism almost. Like I think, and this is just occurring to me, he's trying to do something really good. Like he thinks, I think, achieving these altered states and fundamentally changing your perspectives is good. It makes these people have really good experiences and be really well-meaning. But there's almost a danger in that there's an implicit suggestion that not doing that is somehow less optimal, is quote unquote bad, or less desirable. But I think, as I think more about this, it's almost like a metaphor for society. It's that you want to appreciate all the going backs and forth. You want to appreciate all the different positions and not think of them as wrong or right necessarily, just, you know, if you know, left or right in politics, you know, not thinking of the other side, or, you know, theists and atheists, not thinking of them as just plain wrong, but as seeing these different points of view as each having things to offer. And even though I may have my point of view that I think is helpful, and I think someone else is wrong, there may be things in that their point of view that's still useful. Like what he talks about at the beginning is his goal is not to solve the hard problem of consciousness, but that in looking at these different theories, it helps you sort of think about and frame these issues. He cares more about how these different theories of consciousness can help us have better meaning in our lives. So it's sort of a very practical, again, the focus is not quite on truth. Like, I don't know that meaning equals truth. Like,
Right. And that's something he brings up. And I suspect he'll go into further with the higher states of consciousness, how people are receiving these contradictory realizations of what is real between each other, indicating that, of course, these contradictories cannot be both real at the same time. But sorry, Sumit, Brett and I just kind of played off of each other a little bit there.
No, it makes sense. But this thing, I guess what I understood was that when you have this insight, right, it won't work for you unless, based on your personality and your background, you have found the optimal balance of what you need to do.
Yeah, kind of like and you need to figure out, like, okay, so you can see that other people are happy doing X and other people are happy not doing X, or like they gain most meaning from doing goals that are beneficial for society. Other people are most happy by achieving goals that are only beneficial for themselves, or not even caring about goals in general. And so you can see there's many different types of people out there. And then if you can better understand, okay, which type of person am I, that gives you a much better understanding of like what you can be doing. Now, of course, you can, if you see that there's such a grand problem with, say, the world in general, that you have to adopt a role that is not conducive to your personality type, then that is something like, say, I don't know, you're somewhat cowardly, but it's wartime, then you're going to have to put off that cowardliness in order to satisfy your duties. Otherwise, you're going to be destroyed by this outwards enemy approaching, or whatever it is. So yeah, having a good understanding of like, what's the necessary move in this situation? Do I change my personality to better fulfill the needs that my situation calls for? Or do I change my actions so as to fulfill the needs of my personality? So yeah, just having a good understanding of like, what are the needs in your society right now, or so that you can continue living within it, and what are the needs for your personality that you can also continue living within it. That's, I don't know.
Well, also understanding ourselves means, and the arena and our role as agents, you know, it's not about like the arena is not about the physical components of the arena. Like the arena is really a mental construct. You know, when you think of a tennis court, there's the actual physical parts of the tennis court, but it's only a tennis court because we conceive of it all together as a tennis court. And again, like he said in one of the previous lectures, you know, like a football player in a tennis court may feel really out of balance. But again, that football player can really think of himself as, okay, well, this isn't my game, you know, and I'm here in a different arena with different, and maybe I have skills that can contribute to this. Like one of the main focuses of this lecture is these altered states of consciousness don't impart new knowledge, is what he said. Like there's no new fact that is learned, but our approach of how we see ourselves. Like maybe that person who's a coward and who maybe are weak, you know, an army doesn't just put everybody on the front lines, because there are certain people who aren't going to be good at that. So part of this of your agent agency, maybe I'm not a good fit for this arena. Maybe the person, you know, it's not just he's a coward. There may be good reasons why this person shouldn't be out there, and that may be the modal sort of disconcordance of, you know, this person is not well suited for fighting physically, other people are, and so that person should do something else. Maybe they go behind the lines, maybe they act as a radio operator, or
that's pretty good, because that brings in his relevancy seeking aspect of consciousness, where, okay, so say you have this field of people out there, and then you can pick between, and then you have certain needs that need to be fulfilled, say gathering food, protecting the borders, I don't know, caring for the children. Those are like three needs, like just in a tribal kind of scenario, hunting for wild game, something like that. And then you scan over the environment or the landscape of people and personalities, and body types and different things like that. And then you pick out which of those people best or can most approximately fulfill those needs for the thing. Because I think that's the thing. It's like happiness is not just one singular aspect. There's like a kind of bundle of different needs that are kind of built up that all kind of, or the closest approximation of all of those things being fulfilled can allow for happiness to take place.
Right.
Or contentment, maybe.
Well, that's what I've started
What
using.
you guys are talking about so far is like consciousness, conscious pursuit of happiness, or trying to optimize yourself in the environment. But I'm not able to connect that with this whole inside business, because like you're saying, you have to figure out how the environment is structured and who you are, and then try to navigate it. But that's me
No,
doing
but
it
that's the
consciously.
insight he's talking about. I think that remember, this is different from consciousness. He's talking
I
about.
thought by insight he meant that thing where you are doing some kind of meditation and you wake up and all of a sudden you are enlightened.
No, but that's but see, it's part of it. Like he's, for him, I think the goal is to have this change of insight and consciousness. This lecture focuses on the role that consciousness plays in that like insight is a conscious process. When you have an insight, it like consciousness really to me just means experience, to have what it's like to be something. He talks what it's like to be a human in this one. Anytime you have any kind of any type of experience, that's consciousness. So feeling pain is consciousness, seeing colors, any of your senses are conscious. Any thought, that's consciousness. It's being aware of something. But like he said, there's a whole lot of stuff that goes in the background. And insight, I think, is this aha moment where you sort of see, you sort of suddenly, I talk about getting it. Like I can, like insight in a way, it's more than just knowledge, because I think you feel it. Like he talks about wisdom, but wisdom isn't just knowing something, like, or knowing something. Sometimes explain an argument to me and I can get it intellectually, but if I don't often feel it, then I don't quite get it. He talks about grasping, gripping. We're able to sort of, like, we can grip a cup, we can grip a concept, but just knowing the concept doesn't on its own make us get it. I think
there needs to be that participatory knowing where you've actually kind of like experienced it somehow, or you're like relating a previous experience to this experience so that you can get a better grasping of it and get it, kind of know it from a first-hand perspective rather than a third-hand perspective or third-person perspective.
Even we talk like, this is what I should do. Like we talk, in psychology, I mean, they're trying not to use the word should, but how you see yourself often is a big source of anxiety and that people have. And a lot of what I think psychology tries to do is to change one's perceptions. But just telling somebody, this perception of yourself is hurting you, is causing you distress, and if you change it, maybe that would change. But just knowing, the person can understand. They can say, yeah, I understand that the way I'm seeing myself in this agent arena relationship is harming me. It's causing me distress. But just knowing that is not enough to change that perspective. Now, I think what he's saying is these altered states of consciousness can lead to this fundamental change in someone's perception of themselves in this agent-agency relationship. And he calls that wisdom, but wisdom almost has to be felt in this sense. It's not just knowing something or not just telling someone.
Right. I think he brings up in his lecture on Aristotle that like wisdom is sort of the ability to know and then to change into effect. So like I could know that like, okay, if I exercise 3 times a week, then I'll be more healthy, happier, things like that. But just because I know that doesn't mean that I have enough power within myself, I guess, to change that and make it happen. But if I'm wise, then I know what I need as well as what other people need, so that I can achieve that thing that I know is like for the good or for my goal.
this leads to the problem. It gets back to what I was saying. Like in a society, I think you need people who are focusing on one or the other, for an optimal society. On the other hand, probably those people will never have these experiences because, like, apparently, well, he said some study shows a stat that 30% of people are having these experiences, which sounds really high to me. Maybe that's, I don't know, but I'll have to look at that study. But the fact is, like he seems to say, like going through these sort of meditative processes, practices, can help you achieve this. But that means you have to have the time, and you have to devote the time to. You have to say, I'm a person who's going to do that. Mm-hmm. And that's a person who's seeking that, which may hurt being the person who just delves into something to such an.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the thing. Like you can have the like immediate big change in understandings, which is usually like thought about in regards to like a spiritual awakening from taking, I don't know, DMT or something like that. That this is something that like completely reconceptualizes how you view the world and like what's your role in the world and all that. That's something like a big change that happens. And then as he brings up with insight in his insight lecture on meditation, is that meditation is a system of practicing gaining insight in like small forms, like focusing on one problem, getting a good understanding of the low scale, or what is the term he uses? The breaking down, scaling down and scaling up of the problem or the thing that you're focusing on.
Well, he said there's two types of insight. That's one of a problem. And then in this lecture, he's focusing on the second one, which is more
on consciousness. Yeah.
Right.
It's true. So yeah, and I think you're right though. Like for some people, having such a grand reupholstering basically of their entire worldview can be quite damaging for them. And I wouldn't want to like impose anything like that upon somebody that they weren't ready for something like that. I'd want
not
them
practical. Like a Buddhist monk. I mean, from what I understand, they only are able to survive because in that culture, the culture has people giving charity, and sort of they'll go around, and the only reason they can have food and all that is because people are donating to them to keep them alive. You know, if everyone did that, that would be a really bad society. It would completely fall apart.
Right.
But
that's the thing also, if everyone was only like these worker bees that were only focusing on work, then they'd have nobody there to give them their wisdom insights for like how they should interact.
But if wisdom has to be personally experienced, then like I was saying, like we need to have these people, but are these people able to really pass on? Like if people are getting fundamentally different information, from these experiences, like can they be reliably passed on? And if you can't, if just telling somebody it is not enough to get them to feel it, they have to experience it, then what are they passing on? They're passing on some ineffable experience that this other person, because they spend most of their time trying to survive or produce or whatnot, is never going to have. So I'm curious to see where he's going to go with this. Like I think you do want to have some people who are doing this, but the question is, what can they pass on to the rest of us who aren't?
Well, yeah, I think it would definitely depend upon like what is the connection that is had between the person that goes through the higher state of consciousness and has gained some sort of new system of ontonormativity that should be applied for everyone connected to that. If like it was some Buddhist monk that lived all their time, say on a mountain, and then they came down to, I don't know, New York City, Grand Central Station, and then shared their wisdom to everyone there is living in such an entirely different subjective experience of reality than the Buddhist monk living on the mountain, that I don't know how applicable his wisdom would be towards everyone just trying to get by in New York City. But if it is the case that the person that is deeply connected interrelationally with the people that they are speaking their wisdom and onto normativity onto, then I think that could be applicable wisdom for them. And just like you were saying, it doesn't necessarily mean that what they've gained is real, but it might be real in the sense that, or it's not real in the sense, but it's useful in the sense for these people to apply and to take on as if it were real, to act as if.
And I think it brings it back to what Sir Sumit was saying, and here's maybe where we can interplay it. Like, yes, potentially I could sit under a tree all day and meditate and contemplate and maybe get some sort of awakening and be self-realized or whatever and be happy. But I like having a computer. I like playing video games, but I like living in normal society. But maybe the lesson is, okay, yes, I should enjoy these things, but understand it in terms of my relationship with the video game should be, this is fun, but this shouldn't be just unless it's maybe if I'm a streamer, but if I'm not, this isn't necessarily shouldn't be just my only focus. And maybe getting this or that achievement isn't that important in the overall, and I should just have fun with it, but make sure I'm not forgetting the other important stuff. And maybe that's sort of where the wisdom can somehow be, where we can say, listen, yeah, I have this fun stuff and you should like it. And there's nothing wrong with that, but be careful with it. You know, that is not in itself going to give you the pure sense of well-being or whatnot. It can be part of it, but keep it in its place and have other stuff. Like if I've talked recently where I used to read books and I go through a book a week. And then, you know, in the last number of years, like with Twitter and internet forums or whatnot, I mean, I don't tend to read books much anymore. And I'm reading a lot. Like when you're on Twitter all day, you're reading. You're doing a lot of reading. You're just not reading books. But I like reading books, but I'm not doing it. So maybe it means to say, like, okay, let's take some time away from Twitter, pick up a book and just stick with it. These are sort of the lessons that you can bring in.
Yeah, that's the thing though with Twitter. It has such a like positive instantaneous feedback to it that it's much more addictive than reading a book, or not necessarily addictive, but much more like, I guess, salient in some way because it has that
dopamine.
Feedback. Yeah,
it's that dopamine feedback. Yeah, similar to the
yeah. Go ahead, Smith.
His earlier answer to this problem where you know what needs to be done, but we don't do it, was to build a character, right? So if you had worked on your character, but now I have to wait for some insight to happen or try to make the insight happen. So how do you, how do these two connect?
Well, but I think this is where we can again take it. Like I'm not going to, I've done some meditation, but I'm not going to pretend, and I haven't done a lot of drugs in my life. So I'm not going to pretend I've ever had one of these experiences. I'd like to at one point, but I can listen to these lectures. I can listen to people talk about these experiences, and there are still things I can take from it. Like what we've been talking about, to maybe benefit my life. You know, if all I did was play, like I think there is actually a value to Twitter and having the discussions. I'm trying to have good discussions, but if all I do is have discussions on Twitter, and especially if they're not always great discussions, that's probably not going to make me happy. But I took a break from Twitter, and that was good for me. And I reformulated sort of how I approached Twitter, and I've come back to it. But I wouldn't like to just have no Twitter, even if maybe I could have a more satisfying life. I mean, I like talking to people. We're talking in this discussion now. I'm in this discussion now because I met John through Twitter. You know, so we can take insights from the people who have these insights and apply them and to say to this balance, to say, hey, yes, this is good. You know, the answer is not just to get rid of all Twitter. It's maybe have some Twitter and then read some books. You know, and try and recognize we only have so much time, and recognize, like John said, that, hey, Twitter is addictive. Maybe I should become mindful and ask myself as I'm in the furious, you know, because he's wrong, if someone's wrong on the internet discussion, you know, are there other things maybe I could be doing that also will make my life better? So we don't have to, I think, necessarily have it to have some benefit. I think one of the big parts of this like there's the insight, the axial revolution he's talking about, but I think there's a lot of lessons of just about society and how we interact with one another, even without having these big insights that can be used at least to benefit us as a society.
Well, why would you have it then if it's not benefiting you?
No, sorry. Why would you have what?
Just anything. Like, why would you go towards something? Because I can see how Twitter or YouTube or whatever does serve some sort of benefit in that, like, say, stress relief, something like that, or just calming down, or just a bit of competitive play with people through Twitter can happen. But and those I can all see as like sort of beneficial things, but
right.
It's just what's the phrase, the dosage makes the poison or something like that.
Well, right. Well, no, exactly, because, and this is where the optimization concept comes in. There's probably like, we know, like, for example, Tyler just stays off Twitter entirely, but I think he gives up certain things by that. So the question is not, should I be on Twitter or should I not? The question is, at what point does the benefit become counter? Do you get diminishing returns? There's probably an optimal level of time I could spend per day on Twitter, and we don't necessarily know what that level is, but we know it's not all day, and we know it's not at all. But there's some level in between, and I think where we can sort of bring in it, even if we don't meditate, is okay. Well, let's just try to be mindful of when I'm on Twitter. How often am I on it? Am I on Twitter because I'm having a good conversation, or because I'm procrastinating from doing some task that I want to be doing?
And also thinking about, like, okay, if I go onto Twitter thinking like I'm just going to check my notifications, and then I end up spending, say, 20 minutes there when I was only supposed to check the notifications and then go back to reading my book, then I can realize that this is something that my intention going into this is not being fulfilled in the way that I had. And it's actually like taking over my intention and going even further with it than I had wanted it to. And so that's like some sort of indication, I guess, that there is, I don't know, more being, and of course, like, sometimes intentions change. Like, if you go into Twitter and then you notice, like, oh, this is something extremely relevant to me that I can focus on it and interact with this thread here, then intentions can change for that. But it's,
well, I could say one thing I did, like, I took like a 3-4 month break from Twitter. And then when I came back, this is even before I listened to any of these lectures, I sort of told myself, I'm going to try to have different conversations. I'm not going to continue as much the unproductive conversations where just people are, where it's just the same thing over and over again with the same people. And a lot of it's just insults, and not that I'm just going to say, as soon as someone makes an insult, I'm going to say bye. I'm always going to try to have a productive conversation. But if I see at one point it's just not going anywhere, I'm going to politely say, okay, I don't think I'm not getting anything out of this, or I don't think it's helping either of us, so let's just stop. And I've noticed since I've come back, I've had way better Twitter conversations, because I'm abandoning those not very productive conversations and focusing on the productive conversations. So a much higher percentage of my interactions are productive. It's never completely productive, because that's probably not realistic, but it's way higher. And that came out of a conscious shift of how I saw myself in my interacting with Twitter and with the people on Twitter. So it really did improve the level of dialogue by having a slightly different policy. So again, these concepts, I think, even if we don't have these big insights, I think, like, we can sort of we could just, like, we're often not mindful of the agent-agency relationship. We don't really often think about it. And sometimes it's useful to bring that to the foreground, like you talked about in this lecture, to say, hey, okay, I'm an agent. How do I see myself, and how do I see the arena? Most of the time we do this unconsciously, right? We just do it. We find ourselves in a place, and we act, and unconsciously we do our roles. But what he talks about is that this can lead to a lot of modal, I keep on forgetting the word. I'm saying disconcordance, but that's not the word he uses. But whatever, that because we're not consciously thinking about it, sometimes there's a lot of existential you know,
Mm-hmm.
anxiety that we have, and we just run with it.
Modal confusion.
Modal confusion, right? So we have a lot of modal confusion, and we don't think about it. But with consciousness, what we can do sometimes is consciously think about it, and that's when we can have an insight. And then, so the more consciousness, and then once you have that, it can fade back a little bit into the background because you don't have to think about it so often, right? Because you just sort of do it more naturally, and that can help us. And again, this isn't about truth per se, because nothing has changed other than our perception of our role with our arena.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just, this is what I find interesting, just really dealing with, like, there's more to truth. Like he's saying, there's consciousness, and all this is doing more than just figuring out what is true. It's not that figuring out what is true is bad or good. I mean, I think it is a good thing, but it's not our only goal. And I think this is what he's building up to. So it's not really the focus of this lecture, but I think he's really building up to this.
That was something that I found fascinating. Like, he brought in the Piagetian kind of like tests for a person, a child's consciousness. And he brings in, there's this example, if you like take 5 candies that are kind of scrunched together in a row on the top, and then another thing of 5 candies, but they're kind of like spaced out between each other so that they're, I don't know, like a little bit longer than the top row. The kid will automatically kind of like choose, like, okay, which row do you want? Automatically choose the one that's appears longer, just because it's kind of like using these heuristics of longer equals more. And there's a similar thing that's done for Piagetian example is like, if you have a thin beaker and then a wide beaker, and then you take the liquid and then you pour it into the thin beaker where it's higher up, and then you ask the kid, like, okay, which beaker or which amount of water is more, and they'll say the tall beaker, just because it's higher up. And that's kind of like a heuristic we have, even though they saw that it's the same amount of water from this one the wide beaker into the taller one. It, for us that have like grown out of that, we have a better understanding that this is an illusion of difference. And it's like, it's one that we have in general, where like the higher level of water indicates a greater amount of water. But the interesting thing that he pointed out was the kid might know already that there's 5 candies in each rows, and there's not really like a fact change. It's not like they're being made aware of some new fact here. It's just they have a different level of approach to these types of things, to the where longer no longer means more. And I don't know if that's like a change in fact. I mean, maybe, I guess you can put it that way.
Yeah, it's interesting because yeah, I have the same thought. Like, is it really that no new knowledge is imparted? Like there is new knowledge in that the kid has a better understanding of what the spaces mean. Mm-hmm. You know, where the kid didn't understand really what the spaces meant before, and as the kid gets older, he understands what.
Yeah, I guess it's definitely a difference in knowledge, but it's not like any new fact, I guess, is gained, because like,
well, but did the kid have the fact that a space really means 0, or what 0 means? Like,
well, they could count how many candies are in both. So I guess from the example, like they have their counting abilities, and they know that there's 5 candies in this top one and also 5 candies in the bottom one. But because it's like a trick of the mind that their longer equals more, then they'll go for the right. Bottom row. And so maybe it's not maybe it's the loss of a fact. I mean, it's not necessarily a fact because it wasn't true to begin with that longer equals more, but it was a heuristic that they were using. And so through the loss of that heuristic, then they can make better judgments for the quantity of things.
And I haven't looked at those. I know they're famous studies, but I haven't looked at them. But what I wonder is, because it seemed like they have to do these studies on young enough kids, like kids who are 4 know how to count, but haven't gotten too much beyond that. But what's interesting, I think, is like you said, like all the kids did it. Now, that it may be that the kids were physically also incapable, that their brains simply hadn't developed the pathways needed to do that extra amount of analysis, and that only comes when they're older.
Yeah, and it could also be that, I don't know, kids are very susceptible to agreement with people in authority. So like, even if the question is framed in such a way that there's an assumption that there's more to something, then they might choose whichever seems to be what there's more of. Like, it might not be like, if the person is asking a yes or no type question, the answer that the child might give, they might not think to say neither of these options, just because of the way that the question's phrased. But that's the thing. I'm not entirely familiar with the Piagetian tests either.
But it's interesting because scientists have done a lot of studying now on meditation, and hooking up people to brain scans while they're meditating, and doing scans before the meditation and after, and before someone's an experienced meditator and after. And from what I understand, what it really seems like is that regular meditation can literally change your brain pathways. It can reinforce certain pathways. I suspect even like when people are having these big insights or these altered states, are probably creating new pathways that literally didn't exist before. They've done studies on LSD or magic mushrooms, and they've shown that during these trips, certain brain processes get shut down and resources are moved to the visual processing centers of the brain. So there's literally more pathways, more connections being made in the visual cortex, producing these crazy, wonderful experiences that they have, which I've never had, which I'd like to have one day. But it's an interesting link that there may be something, again, like he talks about the information processing and integrated information theory, that through meditation, you are literally changing the physical pathways of how information is structured in your brain, which may be why you can have these insights, because there are literal connections that are made, not just that you may not have been capable of before, because your brain wasn't configured in a way that would allow you to have that insight, because it changes the connections. So it literally changes what you're capable of connecting in your brain. I don't know. This is my sort of just.
Yeah. And I actually want to get more into Vervake's usage or discussion of consciousness in a second. But I know, Sumit, you have to leave pretty soon. I just wanted to see if there's anything more that you wanted to bring up and to talk about.
Not right now, because you guys by yourself covered all the points I wanted to bring up somehow.
Okay. Sorry, you gotta just jump in here again, Sumit. Just interrupt us.
Well, that's good though. At least that we're
getting
discussing the things that you wanted to talk about. Okay, cool. All right, yeah.
What my concern was when you said that doesn't that you did ask a question about why would you do something that doesn't make you happy or that doesn't lead to the best. So you were kind of assuming there that the individual is in control, right? But that's not true for I would say so many of us. We are being run by things that we don't understand. For example, whether it's addiction to social media or porn or whatever it is, or just plain inertia or lethargy. So I tell myself I'm going to wake up at 6 in the morning and do this or that, but I don't. So, but then in the end, I think POD made the point that I wanted to make, which was that you have to practice certain degree of mindfulness, and eventually that will bring this kind of change where this process of making this decision of doing things like not being in control, that will become conscious. Right. So we are good there.
Yeah, being able to, like, especially if you recognize that, okay, doing this thing always leads to bad outcomes for myself, or negatively experienced subjective outcomes for myself. And then through meditation or a practice of insight, getting a better understanding, like, okay, what is the causal relationship between the actions prior that lead to this negative experience? And then can I now change my environment or how I go about things? Like, do I adopt a new principle now so that this causal aspect of causal aspect of what I do that leads to a negative repercussions, can I change my way of going about this so that it's no longer happening to me? And that requires a great deal of self-control for one thing, and also the wisdom, and I think it all sometimes also has to have some sort of social mechanism associated with it, because like I realize that I don't have full autonomous control over myself, but the good that I will to do, I'm not always able to accomplish. But when there is some sort of like secondary externality, I guess, or not necessary externality, but secondary system of
impetus, or just
it's like the impetus for it, then I'm much more able to satisfy the things that I set out to do, because I've put myself into a situation. So this is something I'll sometimes do on Twitter. I'll say, okay, I'm going to try this thing, and then just kind of leave it up there and attempt to go through with that. And that's actually been pretty helpful for me. Like I did a fast for a couple of days and said that I was going to do with it. And then using Twitter as just kind of a platform to talk about what was going on during that fast, and other things I've tried as well, with mixed results, but I think always more beneficial result, or more, I guess, satisfactory results than if I had not gone through with this secondary component of responsibility.
Well, it's like a control, like where, and this is sort of where, I think he's talking about the practice of mindfulness, that it's not something we're just naturally good at. We can get better at it. Like for example, I know that overeating will make me feel bad, but I'm a stress eater, and I tend to just, you can see, I tend to eat too much. And I know, as I'm doing it often, often it's after the fact. Like I know, oh, that was bad. And it's often before the fact. Oh, I don't want to overeat. But then when I'm doing it, I can sometimes zone out and realize, and I'll realize later, I just ate way too much without even thinking about it, because I wasn't mindful of it at the time. And so I think what Vervake's talked about in previous lectures is, by practicing, say, meditation, you can get better at bringing mind, like what you did for that 3 days, is you were mindful of that for 3 days. That was your focus for 3 days. But then what may happen a week or two later is you're not focusing on it, and then you develop the bad habits. So it's like almost like a reminder. I think what you were talking about, almost like a mindfulness trigger, something that helps, a control that helps us. Like we can, like for example, we can say, okay, I know I'm going to overeat, so maybe I shouldn't have certain food in the house. But that's like a control we put on it ourselves. But that's not mindfulness. It's while we're mindful, we make a good decision to help us later on when we're not mindful.
Yeah, that makes sense. So because that's kind of the thing. Whenever we practice these habits that we know are detrimental to ourselves, we're doing so almost in an act of like self-bullshittery, where we're almost like trying to make ourselves not aware of the thing that we're doing, just so that we can accomplish the thing that we're driven towards. And it's
like what story we tell ourselves. Like when I overeat, sometimes I'll say, like, oh, I just did something good, I deserve this, or I'm not feeling good now, so I need this. And that's the story I tell myself, the agency relationship that I tell myself to permit myself to do it.
Right. The rationalizations that we use in order to do the things that we know we shouldn't be doing. And Yeah. So if we had this, I guess, practice of mindfulness and meditation, then it, like, maybe we won't be as capable of shutting down our awareness for what we're doing. It might be the case that, like, by practicing and like keeping, I don't know, some sort of habit or reminder to pay attention to what you're doing, then you're less able to shut down that part of your mind. And if
or
you're
rather, it's that you bring external cues to help you bring it back to the foreground.
right. Yeah. Bringing to the foreground your own awareness of what you're doing. And I think that's kind of the thing too, is like, usually in order for us to do the things that we know are bad, is we're making ourselves unaware. Or it's not necessarily like making us unaware, but it's like dismissing the causal relationships between these things. So like, I feel good now, so I'm going to do the thing that makes me feel good now, even though, and dismissing how it's going to make me feel bad later, something like that. But if we're mindful of it, I guess we'll have to, like, I know it makes me, I'm telling myself that it'll make me feel good now, but in order to do that, I'm shutting down an aspect of myself that is just going to be there to remind me that, no, this is something bad for you later.
Or it's a story that there is a good feeling I get from eating this thing now, but overall it will decrease my well-being because I'm going to feel sick, I may get fatter, I may get out of shape, it may when I feel bad, it affects my mood, sometimes it causes brain fog, and there's all these negative effects so if I'm more mindful of it, I may tell myself, okay, yes, I could have the good, I could have the good feeling from eating this extra hamburger and fries, but there's going to be downsides later that will last way longer than the 5-10 minutes it takes for me to eat this. So maybe that gives me the self-control. That being said, I know I'm very good at even having those flashes of insight and then still telling myself, inventing a story that lets me go ahead and
we're very clever at or the brain is very clever at making up these types of stories that help us get away with doing the things that we want to do. So yeah, that is something, hopefully through this lecture series we'll maybe get a better understanding of, and maybe even like some practice elements to put these ideas into practice. I think would be very good, because I know all of us have those aspects of ourselves that we know that we shouldn't be doing these things, and yet find ourselves caught within their grasp and following through with them. Okay. Are you willing to go into sort of a topic shift?
Sure.
Okay. I think Vervake, in this discussion of consciousness, kind of leaves out something sort of important. And that is the aspect of intentionality, and also like the feeling of having of directing things. Because the way that he just kind of put forward the kind of ideas about consciousness can all be sort of put in a passive sort of sense, where consciousness is a thing happening rather than consciousness is a thing that is being directed. And for certain philosophers like John Searle, he brings up how there's this aspect of consciousness that is very much about directing. Like, I have intentions for what I'm doing. So I'm going to move my arm up right now, and then I do so. That is an element of I have this idea and I intend for it to be accomplished. And then through that, I can fulfill that intention and make it so. That, I don't know, it might be partially Vervake's Buddhist kind of mindset for this. And I know he's very good at understanding the, like, coming from a Western background, of course, he understands a lot of it. I don't want to assign any sort of malintent or anything like that. I just think that there is something more to the discussion of consciousness that this lecture somewhat left out.
Yeah, like I think it's still implicit in a lot of what he says. I mean, a lot of the goal, like we've talked a lot of today just about, just the goal of becoming more mindful. For example, with regard to eating, is that when I'm about to stick that extra, where I'm already full and still eating, I will become if I practice mindfulness, I can become aware of it and then make the choice not to take that next bite. So even though I hear what you're saying, but even though I think he doesn't really mention it directly, I think his whole point is that what I think what he's talking about is we often do this back and flow, sizing up and sizing down, scaling up and scaling down. We often do it unconsciously, but that by doing it consciously, like with intention, and here he's sort of equivocating a bit, by doing it sort of intentionally, we can shift how we then go back to doing it unconsciously. So I think his point is, that we should practice these things. So practice saying, just literally telling ourselves, okay, I am sitting in a conversation now. What is my agency? What is the arena? Most of the time, like up until the second, I've just done this unconsciously. But now that I'm focusing on it, I can think, what is my role here? Or, we talked about Sumit's example of, or I don't know if yours is Sumit's, but the soldier who's a coward. Well, we said, okay, but the guy can then say, okay, well, what is my role here? Maybe I'm not best suited for combat, but maybe I would be really good in a support position. So I think his goal, if you're not even if you're not quite getting to that whole insight of the whole altered state, is to bring these things consciously to the foreground enough times that they become then sort of second nature. We develop it as a habit, and then that's what gives us the long-term benefit, that it relieves the existential dread.
Yeah, and I think that is entirely right, that by first having the kind of will to do something and then following through with that, we can build up these like pathways in our mind or brain that allow these these what was previously willed to become sort of a habitual practice. And I guess I would have preferred him bringing in the intentionality that is required to have these habits form, and like
but I think his point is, and this may get to it, but he may agree with you to an extent. Like we talked about, you can tell somebody often something, but if they don't get it, telling them is not going to help. Like there are a lot of things where I have the intention to do something, and then like you just said, like then I just don't do it, and I think what he's talking about is practices that can help put you into a state so you do it.
Right.
But
that
accept that part of it is out of my control. But like meditation gets into neuroplasticity, where we can we literally reshape our brain. But we don't do it by saying, okay, brain pathways, I want you to change direction and shape and all that. We don't do it that way. We say, okay, I'm going to focus on my breath for the next 20 minutes. And I'm going to do that every day. And then by doing that, I'm literally changing or reinforcing certain brain pathways. So we have to accept, I think, that part of it is out of our control, that however much we want, however, I always talk about it, there's certain things I can intellectually understand. I understand it would be probably good for me. It would probably benefit me if I did this, if I thought this about myself. But I don't think this about myself. I can think, yes, it would be great for me to do it, but I currently don't. Even saying it, I get intellectually, we can get into my own psychology, but I'm not going to get into those details, but I get it. Like I get why this conception of myself is hurting me, but that's not enough to have the insight that allows the change.
Yeah, that's a very good point, that like just when we're interacting with other people, there's no like the fulfillment of a will, because like you have to bring forward the things in such a way that they are going to accept them. That's like how you can have a good dialogue with somebody is by speaking their language, getting to know them, understanding what are their goals, what are their needs, and then providing those for them so that you can make yourself understood. And that's very much the same way for ourselves as well. Like, we are biological organisms with different needs that are being driven towards different things, that our conscious ability to kind of like direct focus or attention or intentionality or things like that is not as in control as we might wish it to be. So Vervake gives us kind of the necessities or prerequisites to allow these these practices to take hold, I guess, by if you get a good understanding of like the different components to consciousness and how insight works and things like that, then you can, through your intentionality direction, focus on these types of things and then turn them into the more automatic unconscious responses to the way the world is and how we.
He makes the point at the end that it's literally a skill. You know what he talks about is like, he says pursuing the idea that higher states of consciousness are rational is not because it gives us new knowledge. We know that because people come out with completely opposite conclusions. So some people say, I had this experience and I know there's a God. And then other people say, I had this experience and I know there's no God. Now, they both can't be true. So these experiences can't be giving us aren't necessarily giving us new knowledge. But what's changing, he says, is not the content, but your functioning. You're gaining wisdom, which he talked about, is gaining the skills of significance landscaping. We radically transform our existential mode. That's a skill. That's something that can be learned and practiced and developed. And if we don't practice and develop it, we probably won't get better at it. And maybe we get stuck. And I know I get stuck. You get stuck. Like I say, you can tell me over and over again, but even how, like, okay, I don't have this issue, but somebody who's afraid of heights, what do? You can tell them, they can understand, most of the time there's not going to be a problem. If they go up in a high building, they're not going to fall off. But what do? You put them on a ladder and you have them go up one step and then back down. And then the next time you say, okay, go up 2 steps and then back down. And then 3 steps and then go back down. And 4 steps and go back. And then by the end, they've lost their fear of going up the ladder. Now, they haven't gained any new knowledge. They knew from the beginning that like they probably wouldn't fall off, but they had a fear of it. But by doing a practice, they got it. They what they understood intellectually, now they felt, right? And so they lost that fear. And they only did that because they practiced. Now you could say, okay, like we can say that this can apply not just to fears but this can apply just how we view everything. And we get into these patterns. And I think he's saying is when you have these altered states of consciousness, it can change the way you look at these patterns and how you make sense of these patterns. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you're developing a new knowledge of these patterns or you're more right, but you are thinking about them differently, and that can give you, again, what he calls wisdom and maybe get it. And then again, I think maybe we should leave this part now, because I think in the next few episodes, he was foreshadowing that he's going to get into the science and how we could make sense of this in a way of saying, okay, what's real and not, and is it rational or not? And this is where I'm still off, like, and does it matter? I mean, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I'm looking forward to his future discussions. Like, it's a 2-parter on the nature of like higher order consciousness or higher states of consciousness, and like what is the knowledge gained from that, and how is it applicable knowledge, or what is it that is actually gained? Is it just useful information for that individual, or something that can be applied even further than them? So yeah, I'll be looking forward to that. I don't know, since it's a 2-parter, maybe we'll discuss both of them. That might be a useful
I got the sense this was sort of like a bringing together. It was just sort of bringing in consciousness per se, but a lot of even the things we're talking about are things he has talked about in that. But again, that's part of the process too. is where you're bringing something a little bit new, but reinforcing the before, what you've learned before. But I was worried. I kept on asking myself as I was listening to it again, but what about truth, and where does truth fit in? And I think he's sort of getting to that. I think he's aware of that. And I think what do you think the danger is of not focusing on the intentionality per se, and sort of focused on he almost seems to be developing the unconscious.
Yeah. I think that putting everything in almost this passive sense, it restricts the person's ability to actually work through these things in a small way. And I think, like you brought up a very good point, that having having the understanding of how we passively react to things gives us much better ability to react to them in such a way. Like the cup is graspable because it is a certain shape, so that makes it easier for me to pick up. But if it's not like graspable exists entirely just within the cup, like the way it's shaped, you have to also have the hand within the person, the agent that's picking it up. And I think that's kind of like what the intent is within a person. So like you can give me all the systems of like how to achieve insight, but if you leave out that it has to be actively sought out through the person themselves that's seeking the insight, then it's something that we can like willfully ignore, just like kind of like how we brought up before for these negative habits that we have. I will like I can like direct my attention such that my causal understanding of a thing is kind of ignored and left out. That like I have to actually intend to bring that it's not foreknowledge, but like understanding of like the causal aspects to things. I have to actively seek that out or bring it into my consciousness. Like his example of the computer. Like when I'm using a computer, I'm the one that is searching into my files and bringing up something out there. It's not like a computer finds the correct file and brings it up to me, and then finds the next file and brings it up to me. So he brings forward, yeah, I think you're right. He brings forward kind of like what the unconscious is, like how we automatically respond to things. Like I think even our salience is something that's kind of automatic, where something will just kind of like pop out at us. And it's not like we popped it out, but it's
right. Like you can't choose. I can't just say, I'm going to have an insight right now.
Yeah.
Where is it? Where is it? But I think what he's saying is you can put yourself in a position where you have a greater chance of having an insight. And I find like I meditate on and off, and I never have had a regular practice, but I found it valuable when I do. And one thing you notice a lot when you meditate is that your mind wanders. But I will find often that I will often have to stop my meditation and write down a thought that I had during it, because often I'll come up with solutions to problems or things I should do that I wasn't thinking of before, just by meditating, by sort of shutting down, I think, certain processes. It frees up your brain to make connections that you hadn't made earlier. And again, like I didn't do anything. In fact, when I was meditating, I was trying not to think about that stuff. But I did make connections.
But that's the thing, like even the idea of focusing on your breath, that requires an intent behind it. Like
that's what but mindfulness does equal intent. So whenever he talks about mindfulness, when you're being mindful, it is always intentional. If it is not intentional, it's not mindfulness. So he may not be using the word intent, but anytime he talks about mindfulness, it's intentional. You can't unconsciously, you can't like accidentally be mindful. Like being mindful means you are deliberately doing it. Like the whole point is most of the things we pay attention to, we're actually not mindful of. We just sort of go through life and it's in our consciousness, but we're not mindful.
Mhm.
We're not. It's
Yeah,
not
it's
in.
just kind of in the background.
Yeah, right. Or even when it's sort of in, like he talked about super salience at some point, where you're really focusing in on it. Like I can see this cup, but most of the time I'm not really focused on the cup. I see the cup, I intend to pick up the cup, but I'm not really thinking about the cup.
Mhm.
You know, it's and I do it without even thinking about it. So whenever he talks about mindfulness, I think you've got to sort of translate that as he's bringing in intention.
All right. Yeah. Yeah. And maybe he'll go into it further, but and I think it's probably more applicable for the current field the current discussion that he's having right now, very much of the more Eastern understanding of things, and also the fact that he's bringing it to a Western audience to give them a better understanding for what these Eastern mindfulness practices are, and to get a better understanding of consciousness through that light, because that's kind of his he is a Buddhist teacher, so he's framing the meaning crisis, the awakening from the meaning crisis, from a Buddhist lens. And that's a very useful lens, especially for the modern West now, that is undergoing such a meaning crisis, where the Eastern cultures that have this kind of Buddhist framework aren't really suffering from the meaning crisis in such a way. So I appreciate his system that he's bringing forward. I just think, I don't know, I just wanted to point out that there are more aspects to consciousness that might not have been fully emphasized during this lecture.
Oh, and I agree. Like he, for example, he sort of emphasized how consciousness is related to bringing relevant things to our attention, and he linked it to the parts of the brain dealing with intelligence. But consciousness often has nothing to do with intelligence. And you know, when I touch a hot stove and instinctively bring my hand back, it's not about, you know, it's about the pain helps protect myself because I was brought back. And we can sort of imagine how earliest forms of consciousness may have been, which would have just been light sensitivity in some organism, and that helped it, or heat sensitivity that helped it survive because, you know, it had some sensation of pain, or the light was good for it, so it could go towards the light or whatever. But that's not intelligence necessarily. It's not. I mean, these would have, you know, so it's, there's a lot more to consciousness. You know, any kind of experience we have is just I'm touching a table. You know, I'm touching this computer screen. I'm feeling something. That's part of my consciousness, but it's not. I wouldn't say that's intelligence. There's signals that are going, and I'm having this sense. So I think intelligence is one of the things consciousness can help us with, but
there's a lot of unconscious things, or a lot of non-intelligent things that are entering our consciousness that we're reacting to and interacting with. Yeah.
The thing is, he talks about the difference between he talks about relevance, and that what consciousness helps us do is bring to the foreground relevant things. And I think it's interesting though that we all have subtly different things we find relevant. You know, there's no right way of considering things relevant. And, you know, in practice, you know, I focus on one aspect, you focus on another aspect. And again, I think it comes back to, it's probably good that there are people that I focus on one thing and you focus on the other thing. And then what would be even better is if we bring them together. The problem is when we think, well, you're wrong because you focused on that thing. Mm-hmm. And I'm right because I focused on that thing. And mindfulness may help us become aware of that, and then help us say, okay, I didn't come up with this other approach. What was your approach? What did you consider relevant? And then we can integrate together.
Right. And what you had brought up there, that relevancy, I think it's very much tied to our kind of agent arena relationship that we have. He brought up in, maybe it was lecture 5, I'm not sure exactly, but when he started talking about agent arena, so that might have been Aristotle as well, that in order to interact with the world, you have to assume an identity, and that identity is kind of who you are as an agent, that helps you understand the world that you exist within. And you can shift identities. So when I'm on a football field, I'm a football player. That's the identity I accept and adopt. When I'm, say, in the stands, I adopt the identity of an audience member. And so I'm not going to run off into the field and start playing as well, because that would be a breach of that identity. And I think that very much the identity that we adopt changes what things we see relevant for that. And like, that's the thing, like sometimes you can sort of shift how you frame things, like no longer thinking about things as a audience member and instead thinking about it, say, as like, what would it feel like to be on that stage right there? And like, what things would be relevant to them? There's something I went to one of Jordan Peterson's like book tour lectures, and I noticed this thing that whenever the audience like laughed about something he would say, that would change how he was talking, so that he wouldn't follow down the path that he was going down normally, but he would focus on the thing that caused that laughter to happen. So I noticed that there's this like heuristic that he has where laughter indicates, oh, this is something surprising. And so it would be worthwhile to expand upon for the audience there. And so that was an element of like recognizing what was relevant to him that he was having just from the audience, where if I wasn't focusing on that, I wouldn't have noticed it probably. And so that's an aspect of relevancy very much tied to the identity we assume.
But also, like when we watch a movie, we can watch a movie critically, or we can watch a movie just to experience it, and how we choose to see ourselves, how I can how we can change how we enjoy it. I may just say, okay, I'm watching this crazy movie with explosions. I'm not going to think about, oh, how realistic is that? I'm just going to enjoy it. If I start thinking about, oh, that's not realistic, oh, that camera shot is off, and oh, they could have done this scene better, I may have a deeper appreciation, a deeper understanding of the movie, but I also may get a whole lot less enjoyment because I've shifted from just being an audience member to almost being a participant, or critic.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good point. Like, at least for myself, this has kind of been a heuristic I think about, that the framework that we adopt should only be as applicable as we are able to enact change through it. So that's kind of confusing, but like if I was to be watching a film that I'm editing, I would be looking at it through that very critical lens of like, okay, what is this camera shot indicating? And like, how would a different camera angle indicate something from here? So I'm framing it from within the perspective of an editor and getting a better understanding for that, so I can change the film that has the best aspects of what I know to be best put into it. Whereas if I'm an audience member, I have no capacity to change the film. So for me to look at the film and think, oh, that camera angle would be much better if it was from the other direction. It's like it's a framework that is, I don't know, it just seems useless to me.
Except that, I mean, like, it depends. I mean, it depends on what the use is, because, for example, you as a filmmaker, say, you might look at the perspective of the camera angle, and you're not trying to change that film, but you may want it to impact your understanding. So when you make your next film, you're going to take what you learned.
That's true.
But I may be interested. Like, but here's the thing: I may just have an interest in that. It may be something I enjoy. Like, maybe some people, like, there are some people who may not get as much enjoyment of just sitting back and letting the film wash over them. They get more enjoyment by breaking it down. Like, that it's fun for them. Like, what if I never make my own movies, but I like to critically look at movies, and that intellectually stimulates me and leads to conversation. I may have a conversation afterwards about it. And maybe I'm not, and maybe I hope it changes. Maybe someday the director will see my comment and it'll help change their next movie. So I think we have to broaden out a bit, though. Like, use can be not just, I want to be a filmmaker, but I may have other uses for doing it. Like why do people argue who could win in a fight, Superman or Batman? Like, there's there's no real use. It's just sort of intellectual stimulation. And
that's true. Well, yeah, that's kind of the, I guess, the use then in that for those types of situations. So yeah, that's a good point, that like there's always multiple kind of like functions or uses to something. And just because one function is actually non-applicable, like it's not going to be like, say you're just some nobody that's looking at a thing and is like, this re-edit, oh, what's the fan edit of the Hobbit series, it's not going to be like the new thing put out on DVD.
Right.
But it does provide a use of like the people that enjoyed parts of the Hobbit but preferred, say, the Lord of the Rings more, and then it was made for their benefit, I guess. So yeah.
Oh, but it's like, look at like the undergraduate. Like I did an arts degree. I did history, philosophy, political science, and like what I learned, like the purpose of an arts degree is not the knowledge you get. It's learning how to think. Like it's just like math, for example. The vast majority of people do not become mathematicians. So we don't learn math. We don't learn advanced algebra or calculus or whatnot to be able to, most of us, to be able to put into practice. But in learning math, we learn a certain type of analytical thinking that we do a whole bunch of problems. We can then take those skills and bring it to other things. Or my political science, history, and philosophy, even if I've forgotten most of the details that I learned in university, a lot of the skills I developed, the analytical skills, I apply today. So the guy who's just analyzing, the nobody who's critically analyzing the film edits and all that, he may not be developing skills that will apply to him in a career, but that any kind of analyzing like that is probably going to apply in just how he critically analyzes other things. I mean, this guy, for example, he's paying attention. He's being mindful to the film in a very different way than somebody who's not paying attention to that. And that is going to be useful. He's just unconsciously developing his mindfulness by focusing in on certain aspects. He's seeing that movie in a very different way than the guy sitting next to him. And that can be useful. So like, but again, just like I said, like if you do too much of it, if you only do that, then you're not producing anything. If you never, so you have to also be mindful of that your purpose may not be the explicit purpose, but then you should be applying it in some other way that is useful.
Right. Yeah. And so that makes sense. Then the like the serious output of energy or focus or an attention onto something specific that from an external perspective, like has absolutely no bearing to reality or anything like that. Like some model maker for that recreates Civil War battles in their basement, something like that. Like to me, would have no application or utility, anything like that. But maybe that the devotion that he puts into that is something that also helps him. That same similar type of devotion is what builds in him the habit of, I don't know, maybe accounting, if that's what he does for his career or something like that. Being able to look at things from a very serious perspective and maybe like third person perspective on things. And also it also has the other secondary result or telos to it, that it provides him a output of creativity that for himself that it is like, I don't know, conducive towards his well-being that he has there. So it's always multiple kind of ends to sorts of things, and just because one of those ends is not actually going to be achieved doesn't mean that that's the only service that it kind of provides.
But I think where your point comes in is that maybe what we should be doing is every once in a while, when we do something a lot, become mindful of it and ask ourselves these questions. Is this benefiting us in other ways? And if it's not, maybe it is something we want to consider not doing as often. Just like that, I reflected that there were certain Twitter conversations I was having that was not making me feel good. It was not benefiting the other party. Mm-hmm. It really had no benefit at the end. And I said, okay, I'm gonna have less of these. So So I did. I stopped. I didn't stop altogether. I stopped altogether for a while, but then came back. But like so we should be asking ourselves, okay, why am I having these conversations? Is it just because it feels good? And does it really feel good? Because I think we do a lot of things that it meets some instinctive need, but we realize after, you know what, I don't feel better. Like when I overeat, I think in the moment it's doing some good for me, but at the end I'm like, you know what? I just feel bad. So without becoming mindful of it, without integrating that, without becoming conscious of it, all these things we're talking about, we're likely to continue that negative pattern.
So I don't know, this maybe brings in an idea that I have for trying to turn this into some sort of practical, I don't know, something that we can do to get a better understanding of, like, to be more mindful of our own lives right now, is maybe take a day of the week and like sometime like during the next week or something like that, and then keep track of like maybe every 15-minute chunks how you've spent your time. And then once you have all of that, find out where do you spend the most of your time, and then maybe come up with what are the 4 causes or reactions that
Right.
are accomplished through that. Like, you can think about it both positively for yourself, positively for others, and positive, say, for society. And maybe also think about, okay, what are the possible negative ramifications to this as well? So like, I'm putting X amount of time into, say, watching YouTube. That is something I put too much time into. What are the negative ramifications to that? It's certainly shortening my attention span, it seems like, or shortening my ability to sustain my attention for long periods of time. And also like making it so that I have to actively feel like I'm being entertained by something instead of actually, yeah, because that's kind of the thing. Instead of like researching something, I'm putting myself into audience mode and only just being the recipient for information to be passed down to me, instead of actually finding out how people learn things and the practice of learning things. So that's something I know is one of my negative aspects that I need to cut down on by quite a bit. So I don't know. I think that could be useful, is to figure out what
by doing the exercise of saying, okay, I'm going to do this for a week. Then what hopefully happens is next time you're doing it and you realize, oh, wait a minute, I've now been on Twitter for half an hour where I tended to only be on for 15 minutes or 10 minutes. And hopefully what you develop the habits where things suddenly then pop into your consciousness where they didn't before. I mean, I think what Vervake's trying to get at, I think, or at least maybe I'm reading through it, but that by practicing, by doing the exercise a few times, and I think they say it takes 2 weeks to form a new habit, or at least, but so by saying, I'm going to do this, I'm going to put in my schedule, I'm going to do this for the next 2 weeks, and then hopefully it becomes more second nature later on. So it starts with the intention, but then you don't have to focus on it as much because
because it's been turned into a habit. Yeah. And that's the thing. Sometimes habits need to be cultivated and sustained. Otherwise, they just kind of die off because they were no longer serving a purpose. So yeah, that could be really good. Like, I don't know. I have this Chime app on my phone that will, like, you can set it so it sets off every 15 minutes. And so maybe if I do that and then take a note, just what I did in the past 15 minutes. And then,
have you started doing this, or you're going to?
No. This was just an idea through this conversation.
That's probably good. Yeah, good. It sounds like a good thing to do, and yeah, it might be interesting. And then what's more interesting is, then do you find yourself becoming more mindful of it, or do you just fall back into your old patterns? I know it's a problem I have where it'll be good. Like I'll do something for a few days or a few weeks, but then I fall back into the old patterns. Yeah. So that's something that I'm definitely working on, how to keep the good thing going that I recognize is good and keep it.
Yeah, going. It needs to have kind of that limited area of effort required for it. Because like if it required a good deal of effort, like, okay, I got to put down, take 2 minutes every 15 minutes just to catalog everything that I did in the past 15 minutes. But if it's just like a one sentence thing that I can scroll down, or even just draw a picture, that's something else I used to do when I was trying to be much more productive. I would scrawl a little picture of what I planned to do. And that was just so much easier, and especially easy to look back on. Because if you write things in words, then you have to actually go through the process of reading it. But if you look at a page and then you see, oh my gosh, there's like 10 pictures of a YouTube player there, then it's like, oh my gosh, this is too much of my day was spent entirely on YouTube. So
right.
Yeah, I don't know. There's one other thing. Since you seem to be, you have a little bit more knowledge on the integrated information theory. I wanted to get a better understanding of that, because I don't think I fully understand it, because it almost seems like it's indicating that information that we get out of things is like built into the structure of the thing itself.
Yeah, well, I think now I'm a layperson, and I don't I'm sort of autodidactic in a bit of any science stuff I know. Like I wish I regret now not being as interested in science when I was back in school, but I'm interested now. But I don't have the sort of technical knowledge to understand it a lot. But we can look at information. Often we look at information just in terms of, you know, writing in a book or just the things we say. But information, I think, goes way deeper. I mean, information, you know, is physical. We can break, you know, I think just the bonds of atoms. I mean, that's information. That's why we talk about information being destroyed when it goes into a black hole. We're not talking about some idea. We're talking about the information contained in the thing. And there was a paper that I had found several years ago, and I've lost it. I'm trying to find it again, that they were even able to translate the laws of physics into informational theory terms, so that you can, and it all revolves around entropy.
Yeah, I think that's like the holographic principle, where anything that is like a three-dimensional space of an object can be described in a almost like two-dimensional information aspect of itself.
We're saying like even just like, you know, relativity, like all the, you know, the formulas we have for the physics could literally be could be like, you know, like you do a mathematical proof and you manipulate both sides, that they could do this as well with information, that we could really talk about. I think I'm much closer, I think, to sort of information being sort of fundamental in the same way as other stuff, just at least when it comes to its relationship to matter. Mm-hmm. Whether there's information outside of matter is an open question, but you can imagine other ways of structuring it too. But so there's a very physical aspect. So what IIT, as I understand it, is saying is that when information becomes integrated, it produces a conscious effect in the system. And the more and deeper and expansive the level of integration, and it's in 3D space as well. So it's not just software. So in IIT doesn't predict, say, just a computer can just become conscious, just because it's, you know, that there may be something about the physical structure of, say, a brain that allows us to have this quality experience. But it still, it doesn't depend on brains. Like any integrated structure, any time information becomes integrated, the hypothesis is there'll be a conscious experience of some sort. So he talks about a photodiode, which integrates information, and he hypothesizes that there's probably something like it's like to be a photodiode, that it won't be like the level of quality, and he graphs it all out, and you know they graph it out in formulas which again go way beyond what I understand, but that consciousness is not a function necessarily just of brains, but it's a fundamental property, just like mass and velocity, that when information becomes integrated, there's the system as a whole has a sense of quality, a sense of experience. And there is some experimental results that are sort of in favor of it, and just the areas of the brain that correlate best with consciousness are also the areas of the brain that are most integrated, the information. Like the information comes in, like you can think like a wavelength of light, a waveform of, the vibrations of a sound in your ear, then get translated into neural signals. So it's all information, not just like, but so.
Okay. So it's not so much that the information is like integrated in the matter or the signals itself, but it's integrated in the entire structure of like connection between, like, say, the snapping of my fingers. It produces sound that goes into the microphone, that goes into your headphone speakers, goes into your head, and then the pattern of your brain.
But because there's always information, like there's all sorts of colors and sounds that are coming to us that don't come to our consciousness. Like like Vervake was saying, we're not aware of most of there's too much information out there. Some of the information becomes integrated and we have a conscious experience of it. So it's not just all the data, like our brain has more data going back and forth than is integrated. So when that data enters the integrated portion of the pathways, then we're conscious of it. So it's sort of like there's feedback loops. So It's not just.
Yeah, I guess I'll have to look into it further, but like, I guess the way that I conceptualize information is like some sort of like semantic meaning to something that is being like translated across. And I was thinking about like the example that Vervake used, I think in last lecture, of the scrawled letters of the cat, but the letter that represented H and the letter that represented A were exactly the same, like the same scrawlings of it. And so I was thinking like it, from my I guess understanding of what integrated information theory was, that the scrawlings of the H and the A are like the semantic meaning behind them is there within the scrawls. But it seems like,
remember, like you have more than that in your conscious experience of the cat. You have a conscious experience of the lines just themselves. Like you can look at those lines and they could mean nothing. If you didn't know English and you didn't know writing, you would still have a conscious experience of those lines. They just wouldn't mean anything to you. So it's not just about meaning. Like when you think you hit the table, you have a feeling of pain. That's a conscious experience, and it has nothing to do with meaning. I think any experience.
I see.
But when I hit the table, there's literally information, right? So signals are going back through my finger. My fingers have sensory nose, whatever. So tactile senses, information travels to my brain, and I have a feeling of pain, right?
So it's different than from like the standard idea of, I guess, like information of like some sort of message being put across, but it's more like the conscious experience integrated with, say, the matter
but remember what it's saying is IIT says that consciousness is integrated information. They're the same thing. That when information is integrated, there's the conscious experience. So they're one. It's a fundamental property of information being integrated. That's what the hypothesis is. So it's not you integrate, then you have consciousness. It's when information is integrated, that is consciousness.
So if a photodiode contains some element of consciousness within it, why then would a computer not have some element of consciousness with it?
I mean, the way they explain it's just the way the information, I think the feedback loops and the way the information, and from what I understand, again, don't quote me on any of the technical stuff, but they describe sort of the qualia sense in sort of 3D space, and that's part of it. Like, so I'm not great in the technical aspects why it's part of it, but that's sort of just just having information going back and forth, or just sort of binary information is not necessarily gonna do it. So it leads me to believe that if we're going to have true AI, it's not going to be just in a computer. It's going to have probably a computer that operates similar to a brain in 3D space. So it's not just going to be finding the right algorithm. It's probably going to have to be creating a computer that is processes the information in a 3D way. I suspect, like copying what a brain does. I suspect that's so IIT is sort of I like it. It sort of intuitively makes sense to me, but I mean, to be clear, it has, it's relative, it's the last 10, 20 years. So
Gotcha.
it's got a long way to go.
Mhm.
But even David Chalmers,
Mhm.
coined the hard problem. He likes it. So, it's getting traction, and it's sort of related to panpsychism in the way that consciousness doesn't just depend on brains. Anything can be conscious, but not everything is conscious.
Mhm.
So it won't say a rock is conscious. It talks about phi. Phi is the level of integrated information. So a rock or even just a normal computer doesn't have any integrated information. But it's interesting because it may apply to people who are in comas, and if there are certain aspects of the brain where it integrates information, we may be able to deduce, or infer that
Mhm.
this conscious person is having experience. This coma person is having experiences, if they're right. So again, like Vervake said, it doesn't solve necessarily the hard problem. It's more about how it may work than why it happens. Like it doesn't
Cool.
solve the hard problem, but it's really cool.
Yeah, that'll be something I'll have to look into further. Yeah, it sounds very interesting.
And it doesn't treat consciousness as an emergent property. So it's not that consciousness is an emergent property of brains. It's just something happens. It's just that brains are particularly good integrated information systems, which is why they're conscious. But a lot of other things could be conscious. Now, where it like I like to consider myself open-minded that there could be non-physical things that are also conscious. Well, but then what would be consciousness there? Or is it possible? Or does it need to have some sort of structure? Like, what would consciousness without that? Like information, like even when we think about it colloquially, information always seems to have to be held within a medium. Like, we have information on a page or on a computer screen. Like, the words are always embedded, encoded in something. It's not just out there, right? Even like in our thoughts, it's like brain waves that are going on. Like, so we don't really have examples of sort of consciousness that's not embedded in something else. So the question is, like, I'm open-minded as to being something like a god or whatnot, but maybe if there is that stuff, we would call it non-physical because it doesn't follow the rules and patterns of our physical, but maybe it's something else that also integrates information, just made of something completely different. Like, what does it mean just to have a mind that's not embedded in something? Is that possible? Maybe it's not. What is a mind that's not embedded in some other superstructure, substructure? How does it function just out there? It's got to be something. That's my intuition tells me. But yeah, so
yeah, interesting. All right. I think we'll probably wrap it up here unless there's something else from the lecture you wanted to bring forward.
No, just one interesting aspect, that when he was talking about like the kid with the spoon and dropping it, like that I think, like Psi-10b, where he talks, the presuppositionalists who say you can't have any knowledge, or why can we trust our why do we trust our senses or trust our perceptions? He says the only way we can do it is we presuppose God. But I think the example he's saying is, like, we don't do that in practice. What we do is we learn to trust our senses, like the kid taking their first steps. The kid taking his first steps has no idea before he takes his first step if he's going to fall through the earth. He has no idea what's going to happen. But what he does is he takes a step and he realizes, I'm not falling through the earth. And then he takes another step and another step and another step, and suddenly he realizes, hey, I can stand up and I can walk and I can do that, and I can trust myself. For the kid with the spoon, has no idea what's going to happen with the spoon when he lets go, but he lets go and he sees it fall, and he does it again and he does it again. These are empirical. We're learning by experience, and then later on in life, we don't think about those early empirical learning stages where we experimented with everything, because we don't, most of us don't tend to remember back that far. And I think so we don't just trust our senses just because we have them. We have learned through experience where we can trust them and where we can't. sort of, I think I brought this up with Side 10 a few times, but I haven't talked with him just through Twitter.
Well, I think that like falls into their trap of the problem of induction, where you can't assume that our past experiences are going to continue to be the same as they are currently, because that's just a presupposition that you're taking on.
You mean you can't know? The way I say you can't know to 100% certainty. I can't know to 100% certainty that I'm not going to fall through the earth on my next step. But each step that I take on a certain surface without falling through lets me become more and more confident that that's what's going to happen on my next step. So I've always thought of the problem of induction is only a problem if you demand certainty. If you don't demand certainty, it's not really a problem. I mean, most things we do, we don't have certainty. We don't make most decisions based on certainty. Like we make most decisions on what we think is likely to happen, or even just experimenting when we don't know at all.
Right. There's this thing I was, I don't know, I haven't looked much into it, but I want to further, called Agrippa's trilemma, which is about how we cannot really have any element of knowledge. Let me see here it is. I'll share it for the screen. Agrippa's trilemma, that we cannot have knowledge, because knowledge will either be circular, will lead to an infinite regress, or will just be unsupported by anything. It'll just be kind of like presupposed or assumed, or yeah. And I was thinking about how maybe there's some sort of like fourth option where it is, and I guess it would be kind of presupposed in a sort of way, but it's presupposed in such a way that it can be falsified, that the knowledge can be acted upon in such a way that it satisfies it satisfies the intention behind it. And I guess that's somewhat similar to the scientific method, where you assume a hypothesis, you practice it in such a way that could falsify that hypothesis, and then that hypothesis wasn't falsified, and therefore you have some semblance of confidence within that hypothesis being true. And it is similar to like pragmatism, which I kind of consider myself somewhat one of, in kind of the William James variety. So but you're right, it doesn't necessarily give us knowledge at all. It only gives us a degree of certainty in our beliefs.
That's sort of, I think, what knowledge is. Like, I think if our definition of knowledge requires 100% certainty, or requires not possibly being wrong, then I think that's too strict. It's an unreasonable requirement, because we don't tend to need. I don't think we need that. I don't need certainty to say I know something. Like I can say, okay, I think I know with 100% certainty that I exist, but everything else I could be wrong. Now you could say, okay, well then you can't have knowledge. But except I know I have a tremendous amount of reliable evidence that I'm sitting here with a computer. There's some small possibility that I'm actually a brain in a vat and this is a matrix and none of this exists. But I know to a strong enough level of certainty that I can say, I know I'm sitting here talking to you, looking at a computer. Even though there's a possibility I'm wrong. Acknowledging there's a possibility I could be and have no way of knowing that I'm a brain in a vat, or just some floating consciousness out there and you're a figment of my imagination. Just because I can imagine that, and I can't say with 100% certainty, I think it's unreasonable to say, okay, well, I don't know that you're there. I don't know that I'm talking to you. I don't know that I'm sitting here. It's too strict. It's not a useful concept if we're going to say knowledge requires no chance of being wrong.
Right. So, and that's sometimes a thing, like somebody will say they know something, and like, well, how do you know that? And then they're trying to get at that you don't have 100% certainty, or that you can't know this thing to be true because it's outside of, it's like past the limits of our capacity to know things. Like, but it still doesn't change the fact that like we have a high degree of certainty based upon our experience of this thing. And so like, I guess that makes the difference between epistemic knowledge and like ontological knowledge, where Agrippa's trilemma is saying that you can never have ontological knowledge of something without it being circular.
But that requires, by that you mean 100% certainty that something is
well, the
true?
certainty like doesn't even have to be like, you could believe something on 50% certainty, but yet it's a true belief nonetheless. Like,
but what's the definition of knowledge he's using there?
For Agrippa, I think it's like the understanding of something being true. It's nothing to do with how certain we are of it or not.
Right, but to say like, I know it's true, like I can say, I know it's true, I'm sitting here in front of a computer. The fact that I could possibly be wrong, I would say no, we call it not justified true belief. I have enough justification to consider this true belief. Now, I may be wrong that it's true. Like, I think when we're saying we have knowledge of something, what we're really saying is, I have a high degree of certainty that this is true. Now, I may be wrong about having knowledge of it, because if it's actually not true, then I don't have knowledge of it. But that's not a useful concept. It's not a useful concept of saying, I only have knowledge if I can be certain it's true, because we almost never have that certainty. And just saying it because I think it's bad not to have that certainty, like we shouldn't have that certainty. I think you can logically say that there is some infinitesimally small percentage chance that you are a figment of my imagination. I think that we can rationally say that, and I don't have any good reason to believe it, and I don't think it's true. But I think, if I'm being reasonable, understand that there is that small chance. But to say that therefore I don't have knowledge that you exist, again, it's not useful. So why have that as your definition of knowledge? I could say, if you change knowledge there to 100% certainty, then fine. But
no, I think Agrippa's trilemma has nothing to do with certainty either. I think it has to do with just the ontological nature of reality. So like,
no, but isn't he saying that isn't it saying that we can't have knowledge because if we can be wrong, it may not be true. And so we can't have we don't like to have knowledge of it. We say, if I believe something, but it's not true, that I don't have knowledge of it, right? But the only way to have knowledge of it, but the only way to know if it's actually not true is to have some other kind of disconfirming fact that I can either perceive or not perceive. But whether I know something or true is not, it is true or not, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's true or not that outside my house, a pebble just was kicked. Or whatever, roll down a hill, whatever. It's either true or not. Now, I may have no way of ever knowing that for sure. But it is true or not. But what's useful is, do I have good reason to believe it's true or not? And the more certain I am of something, the higher I say my confidence in my knowledge is. So the fact that I can never get to 100%, except in some rare circumstances, shouldn't mean I don't have knowledge of. Is that?
Yeah. And that's the thing. I'm a pragmatist as well. So having like, if a definition or a concept is not useful or viable to act upon, then I also consider it not a useful definition to apply. So yeah, there's no
like if we accept everything Agrippa says, then what's the consequence of that? Oh, should we not believe anything? Well, no. I mean, that's
the thing. Like, that's the, I guess, logical step for a lot of people that consider themselves philosophers, is to become a skeptic and say we can't know anything.
Right, but again, like I consider myself a skeptic in another way, or I consider skepticism of withholding belief absent sufficient reliable evidence, which never means 100% reliable, because I think that's just unreasonable. I mean, the thing is, if you say, okay, well, because I can never know, and this is why I think you have to bring in certainty, because the only reason you say I can't have knowledge is, well, I could be wrong, right? But I don't know I'm wrong. Like, it may be not a single person is able to have disconfirming evidence, but it's either true or not. But I may have no way of ever knowing that that's not true. What I care about is, what can I demonstrate to be true? What do I have sufficient evidence to know is true?
Well, and even for myself, like, you can have this idea of certainty about things, but you could, like, that those might just be words that you're saying. Now, there's a second system that you can use to get an idea of, like, what a person's knowledge is, or even your own knowledge, based upon how much you're willing to give up in case you're wrong. And so that's kind of like thinking about knowledge and beliefs in regards to taking bets, like you're gambling with something. So, like, I'm playing blackjack right here. I'm taking a bet right now that I'm not going to get a card that's higher than 5. And so I'm going to put money down on that bet. And then I can be either true or false, and then I'll just have to accept that. And I'm going to lose something because of that. Now, if I'm not actually putting any money down for this, I could make my belief claim, but there's no, like, I'm not punished by being wrong in that situation. I'm kind of like, I could be the skeptic and just kind of stand outside and say, oh, I'm not going to make any claims about anything here. That way I can't be wrong about ever.
Yeah, like that. And I think it's called having skin in the game is the phrase.
Right.
But that's why, like, my definition of skeptic, which I think I frame it my way, but it's pretty well how, like, you know, when you hear skepticism, like Michael Shermer or James Randi, that's what they're talking about. They're not talking about the Pyrrhoic, I think, skepticism of the ancient Greeks. Like, to say withholding belief absent sufficient reliable evidence, I mean, implicit in that is you should go out looking for that evidence in order to get your beliefs. Like, you can and even once you have certain beliefs, you should, a skeptical approach would be always to be checking to make sure that the evidence is sufficient and reliable, and to be open to new information that could change your opinion because it can show that it's wrong. So just saying, oh, we can't know anything, and I have to always say to 100% certainty, therefore none of it's useful, let's not rely on anything, that is ridiculous. To say, I could say, okay, I can't know anything to 100% certainty. So what? That shouldn't be my test for doing anything. Like, I would never, there's no action I will ever take that depends on 100% certainty.
And that's the thing too, that, like, with your definition of skepticism, it's a sufficiently reliable evidence has not been presented to give you.
It's withholding belief in a proposition absent sufficient reliable evidence. So
right,
you may not be aware of it, but there may be sufficient reliable evidence, but you're not aware of it. So, you know, but
right. And that's the thing too, because it's still kind of placing the I guess cultivation of knowledge within you as a subject, because you're the one that's defining what is sufficient for me to accept this or not. And so, like, you could be somebody that is, what was the term, like they're only skeptical towards things that would apply to them more so, and for other things they'll take for granted. So they've got a very, like, they're very active in how they're applying their skepticism and when they're not. And so, like, I'm going to adopt a much higher degree of evidence for this certain claim, a much lesser degree of evidence for this claim. And because my definition of skepticism is reliant upon sufficient, I can just say, oh, this type of claim requires a much higher degree of evidence, while this type of claim, much lesser degree of evidence. And I guess that's...
Yeah, the way I put that more is, I don't say the sort of extraordinary claims meme. I say the more important the conclusions, you know, the impact of our proposition, the more strict it should be about what kind of evidence and how reliable it is. Like this brings in practicality. We cannot, no human can skeptically examine every single claim out there. We can't. Right. And the truth is, we don't need to. I mean, if I don't care about something, like, again, if you tell me you had a sandwich for lunch, I could grill you for an hour, or I could say, I don't care. Okay, I'll accept that as true because it's not that important. If, however, you having that sandwich for lunch is critical because you're a witness to a crime, and if you were not having that sandwich for lunch, you weren't there to see the crime, then I may say it's worthwhile to grill you for an hour, on the witness stand, because it suddenly becomes important. So it's not about extraordinary claim. It's that, the bigger the effect. And the other practical aspect is that because I can't personally evaluate every claim, I have to sometimes say, okay, well, I'm not an expert in this, but there are people that are experts in this, and I'm satisfied that, they've done their job. They've done enough of a job. Or maybe I even say I'm going to place a bit of faith in them because I don't understand deep physics. I need to rely on people who do. And I have to say, well, hey, I haven't done this research, but this is what the evidence seems to be pointing to. And you can sort of look at the field and sort of see.
And that's kind of like a little bit of like the betting, taking bets example. And it's not necessarily like I'm actually putting like legit skin in the game or money down, but I am placing a little bit of, I guess, my own credibility. So if I'm placing, like, I'm going to believe, say, Michael Shermer for this thing because I heard him say it once. I'm placing a bit of my own credibility in the hands of Michael Shermer. So if it came out that Michael Shermer was wrong about this thing, then a little bit of my credibility is kind of taken away. That's like my skin in the game for my relying upon Michael Shermer, and the same for anybody else too. Like,
we also have to acknowledge that sufficient reliable evidence does not mean absolutely unimpeachable evidence. Like, we should always have the chance that we could be wrong. So being wrong in itself doesn't mean you haven't acted skeptically or done a good job. Like the process of life is figuring things out, and we're often wrong. Scientists are more wrong than they're right. They slowly figure things out. So I think we actually shouldn't just. It's not always about credibility, I think, but we have to be open to. We think somebody's reliable. We have certain information that they're reliable, and then we find out they're not. Well, then we have to reassess. And we shouldn't just say, oh, you found that guy reliable, therefore everything you say is worthless in my eyes.
I'm going to bring up the Agrippa's trilemma again. And this isn't actually his actual trilemma. This is just, I guess, the syllogistic format. Or no, this is not even a syllogism.
Wait, what's LHS and RHS?
Knowledge on, use it on RHS. I don't know. This is something I found online. I'm only looking at this to point out the circular, infinite regress, and then unsupported belief. I wonder, okay, there's this other element of knowledge that is the type that science progresses on, and that is negative knowledge, where there was a claim that became falsified. Therefore, we know that this claim is not true.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if does Agrippa's trilemma apply to any of that? Like, would it be circular, perhaps?
Well, I don't know. I'm missing how he defines knowledge here in the first place.
Well, I think it has to do with true beliefs, or believing something that is actually true about reality. And so I guess it would maybe be circular because, like, I'm setting forward a definition. Let's say Newtonian physics. That's my definition. Or I don't know, some claim that would be made through Newtonian physics. And then through experimentation, we can discover, this claim made by Newtonian physics did not come to fruition. Therefore, we know Newtonian physics is false. Mm-hmm. Or at least that claim through Newtonian physics is false. I don't know if that would be.
Well, we have to be careful too, because things like physics are models, right? Like, they're models we're using to describe. Physics is almost like a language. It's our way of talking about the world, versus I either am or am not sitting in this chair, talking on this computer. You either do or do not exist. I know for sure I exist, but you either do or do not exist. No matter, it's not a model. Like my vision of you may be a model, but there is a collection of particles that, that is you. So, we could say, like with the physics thing, we could say, well, Newtonian physics breaks down at the quantum level, but for a whole lot of things, it's extraordinarily, it's really accurate. So
okay, so it's not so much that Newtonian physics is false in the way that, like, you might say a statement is false, but it's like a model that is applicable for many situations, but not for certain specific situations, which indicates that it's not a universally applicable model towards reality. Right.
And I think if I understand, and I don't understand it, but as I understand Gödel's incompleteness theorem, he's saying there's no model that can ever apply universally, that every model breaks down at some point. Now, I don't understand the finer details of it, but that's what I understand it to sort of indicate, that there's no model, there's no system that can
no system, for sure, yeah.
And a model is kind of a system, I think. So yeah, but you either do exist or you don't exist. Like there's either particles formed in the shape of you or not. Particles either exist or they don't exist, and I'm confident enough to say I know you exist, and that's not circular. I know this because I have very reliable information by seeing you and talking to you over more than one occasion. I have other people have talked to you, so I know you're probably not a hallucination in that sense. But can I rule out 100% that solipsism isn't true and that I'm the only consciousness that exists and everything's a figment? I can't. But I've no good reason to believe, and a whole lot of good reason to believe the rest of it. So yeah,
maybe that's a good way to think about knowledge, is you have greater reason to believe than you do to disbelieve.
Well, no, but I think there has to be a minimum threshold where we call it knowledge. Because just like I could have a little bit of knowledge about one thing and a little bit of knowledge of another thing. I could just say, okay, I have more than this, this more than this, so therefore I have knowledge. But no, I think when we say justified true belief, we sort of mean a sufficiently high threshold. Like you said before, you could just say I have sufficient knowledge. Well, I think it's a little deeper than that. Like I think reasonable people can agree, but we can talk about, like when I say reliable, we can talk about why we think something's reliable or not and what we mean by it. And I think there are objective ways that we can describe when something is more reliable or not. Like through experimentation, we can figure out this method is more reliable than that method. This is why we develop double-blind studies. It's not just that scientists know that they can be biased. When they single blind the study, and then when they double blind the study, when you do sort of an analysis, a meta-analysis of all that, you see different results, and more reliable results go from no blinding, single blinding, double blinding. So we can objectively figure out that for that type of question, double blinding is a more reliable system. We can, we have all sorts of biases, so we can say just somebody saying they perceive something is actually not that reliable
without some sort of secondary confirmation.
Right, because we know people often misperceive things. We know we know from experience, empirical research, that there are lots of different ways we can deceive ourselves or think we see something that's not there. So if all we have is somebody's personal recollection, we know there's too much that can go. So now that saying something is X is unreliable is not the same thing as saying it's false, right? It's just saying I should be very wary about placing too much confidence on just this. So we can argue about what should be considered reliable, but I don't think we can just say, oh, you just say it's enough for me, so therefore you're being skeptical. Like I think there is still, even though we may not agree on the exact level, I think somebody just saying, well, me just thinking it is reliable enough for me, so I'm being skeptical. And I think that there's some. We have to justify why. We have to justify why we consider this type of evidence reliable and why we don't. Just saying it is not being skeptical in the way I'm framing it. But bringing back to like Agrippa, or the presuppositionalist, like I think you can say, okay, well, because I can't know 100% that my next foot is going to fall through the earth, they say, oh, we need God to trust our senses there. But I would say, well, no, you don't have to bring in God. The fact that I have, every time I've stepped, the fact that every time I've taken a step, I have not fallen through the planet, that's pretty darn good, reliable evidence that on my next step, I'm not going to fall through the planet, even though there's some chance that there's an optical illusion that, or I see something and I don't notice, there's leaves covering a hole and I do actually fall through the planet, right? Even though that could happen, or maybe some quantum weirdness happens. Like, from what I understand, there's always some infinitesimally small chance that I could walk through a door. Like, that chance is actually there, that every time I go to a door, there's some non-zero chance I could walk through it. But it's so unlikely. It's likely never to happen in my lifetime or a million lifetimes, right? But we could say it's possible, right? It could happen without even violating the laws of physics. But I would say,
but yeah, if you told me that you happened to walk through a door, that would greatly increase my uncertainty
right.
towards.
And it should, right? But that doesn't mean I can't trust without appealing to some external source. I can't trust that, you know what? I'm pretty confident that next time I take a step, it's not going to go. Or I'm confident the sun's going to rise tomorrow, even though at some point we know our sun is going to go supernova. And there's going to be a time at some point, maybe billions of years from now, but it could be tomorrow, where the sun isn't going to rise. And there's even going to be 8 minutes between the time of that happening before we actually experience any different, because it takes 8 minutes, light minutes, for the light to come to us. So there's going to be a time where we think the sun's there and it's not, So, but and up until that point, I think we're completely justified to say, I know the sun's there, even though that we're wrong.
Right. All right. Yeah, it was good. Oh, I wanted to bring it. Yeah, because I think what you had talked about earlier, the importance of a thing, like raising or decreasing our levels of skepticism or approach to these things. It'll be very interesting, I think, to go into Vervake's next lectures on the higher states of consciousness, because especially how the lessons that they learned through their higher state of consciousness changed how they interacted with the world in such a way that benefited them to a much greater degree than they had before. So I don't know, in a certain way of thinking about it, you could say that their models for reality previously were such that these newer models that they've taken on are more accurate because they have better results that you're getting from it. Kind of like switching from Newtonian physics over into relative Einsteinian physics.
Right. And my question is, okay, so does it, what does it mean to have better results? And does it matter if it's true? Let's just say they're completely delusional about what they think the nature of reality is, but it happens to make them super well adjusted, super happy, maybe help other people produce whatever. It makes them do their job better. Maybe even they do produce more, but it's based on something that's technically wrong. So what is it? And I think he's careful in this lecture. He switches in the end to feels like it's more real. He's not saying it's real, and that's the question.
And that's actually something like Don Hoffman. I'm planning on reading his book pretty soon, but he makes kind of the case that evolution is not making real beliefs successfso, but rather is making reproductive or genetically fit beliefs more successful, making it so that the beliefs that we hold to or the beliefs that we have inherited, I guess, are those that are more fit for us and more likely to reproduce.
Right. You're safer to interpret every movement of the grass as a snake, even though a lot of the times, probably even most of the times, it's not going to be a snake.
Because all it takes is that one time for it to be a cobra, and then you die, and then you can't move on.
Yeah.
So it's built up into your kind of unconscious habits to make you jump from the snake just in case.
But it seems so intuitively weird to say it's not just about truth. And I honestly don't know where to go from that. Like, and it brings it back to, I think, Plato's sort of noble lie.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is, if you're not, like, it may be like I'm a non-believer, but I can see that there may be some ways that it could be positive to believe in a God, even if a God doesn't exist. But let's just accept for the state of the argument, that believing in God has a lot of benefits to society, that even if it's not true, we're better off doing it. But there's a disconnect there. Okay, but do I really not care if it's true or not? Do I really think the noble lie is worth it?
And that's the thing, like,
how do you choose the lie? Because if you miscalculate that lie, you're really screwing things up.
And that's the other thing too, is like, can you willfully choose something that you know you don't have good evidence for, just due to the practical outcomes that you get from choosing that belief?
Well, it's like Jordan Peterson when he talks about like whether he believes in an actual God or not, he acts as if there's a God, which I think is a little wishy-washy way of. I wish he just came out and said that rather than, like, I think he's probably technically an atheist, but he has a weird way of sort of framing it. And then he says to, like, Matt Dillahunty, you often act like you're a theist, so I think no one's an atheist. But rather than just saying, it's sort of
there's that element to Peterson, that he's being a practicing psychologist. I'm sure that you get people that will say one thing, but if you observe their behavior, they act completely different from what they're talking about. And so if you take maybe more of a, I guess, behaviorist approach to discern what people's beliefs are, just by watching what they do, and then it seems as though they're acting as if they're, I don't know. Okay, so like there's when people shake hands, there's like a ritual that we do that has no real like meaning behind it, but yet the very act of shaking somebody's hand is like a conference of trust towards them, and there's no like causal relationship between the shaking of a hand and then the trust that is bound there. It's just a symbolic act between the two. And so it's like we still act very much symbolically in a lot of different ways.
Well, I've said that too. Like I say that whether or not I like somebody or actually respect them, I can treat them with respect and therefore have a more productive conversation. But I frame it in terms of that. Like, I don't frame it in terms of I like you or I respect you. I frame it in terms of I'm treating you with respect. And I think that's sort of the difference between the noble lie. Like I think it's fine to say whether or not God exists, there are benefits to acting like God exists. And that's just to say, like, act like there's somebody watching you. Mm-hmm. Will help you not do certain bad stuff. Say, if I mean, and I think that probably is a positive benefit to. It's one of the reasons religions I think have stuck around, is because, when you think there's always somebody watching you, that you don't think, oh, no one's watching me, so I can steal that thing. No, somebody is watching you. So that's a very big benefit. But we don't have to say, okay, well, there really is something, that thing, because we want people to have that benefit. It's a useful framing where he says, acting like there's a God has a lot of good psychological benefits, and that you could sell things just like that. Like, I don't know why. Like, I'm often frustrated that he doesn't just come right out and say it, and he's very conscious of him not coming right out and say it. And I'm not sure why. It's conspiracy. Like, he just doesn't want to alienate one audience or the other.
There's also the people that are agnostics, where they feel that there is not enough evidence one way or the other to like place a stake somewhere on that branch of I'm not going to believe or I am going to believe. They're just kind of like weighing both options there, not choosing one over the other, but only making decisions that could apply for both not believing and also believing.
Right, but even that person could say, you know what? When I'm thinking about doing something that I know is immoral, I'm going to act as if there is somebody watching me, and then not do it. Like, so even like I'm a non-believer, but I think that could be a useful sort of sort of fiction of just act like there's somebody there. I mean, because again, the problem with, again, like this is where this whole relationship between whether what's real, what's true, and the positive effects, like, and I think that's where he's getting at when he's going later, like, does it matter and why should it matter? But in some ways it must matter. Like I think part of it maybe that because it's so risky with the noble lie, because it's so easy, like if you have somebody so brilliant that they just get it right, that's fine. But the odds are they're not going to get it right. And that for as much as there are benefits to this fiction, there's also harms, like the concept of hell. Sure, there's a lot of benefit to the concept of hell, of thinking, oh my God, if I do this bad thing, I'm going to go to hell. That being said, there's downsides to people are completely traumatized by thinking they might go to hell, or think, I mean, how horrible it must be to think you're going to heaven, but think your loved one, your husband, your wife, your other close friend is going to burn for eternity. Like that's a horrible feeling. So there's pros. I mean, and there's cons.
Right. Yeah, and then if we could figure out a way in which to weigh these against each other. The other thing, though, like with Plato's noble lie, I mean, for Plato, it's not like the citizens of the Republic get any choice in whether they are going to be told the truth or the noble lie. They're all being fed the noble lie there. And I think, like, I don't know if you can get the same positive benefits of believing a noble lie or acting as you can if you actually believe. And I don't know, because that's the thing. Like we already talked about how, like, we know certain actions are wrong for us, but we put it away, like we dismiss it kind of, so that we can go through with it. And if we're only accepting a belief because it's useful, then we can just say, okay, it's not going to be useful in this situation, so I'm going to give it up. And then I can go about doing the thing that I want to do that is actually harmful for myself and others.
Yeah, I think we should table this because I hope he really makes this clear, because again, like he said at the end, you can have completely opposite, like these altered states don't give us knowledge, and we know that because people have come out of them with completely contradictory, beliefs about what's real. But then it just throws up in the air what is real in it, and is it only your sense of yourself, and is it only real in the sense of I have greater well-being because of it, just because I've resolved this, because I've resolved the existential dread, so I'm better off because I no longer have that dread.
That could make a lot of sense. Like if somebody gave up their belief in God because that belief held with it like the existential fear of hell, or the like feeling that like the creator of the universe is an evil one, and everything that happens is part of his evil will towards me and others, then giving up of that belief could be very much a more beneficial thing for them to accept. Or somebody else that has lived a life kind of existential angst and dread and fear like that, and not having any sort of like grounding for something to rely upon.
Criminals who find God, and because of that, they live probably much better lives, whether or not God is real. Probably for a lot of people, it makes their life better, and for some people, it makes their life worse. And often, of course, there's people doing bad things in the name of religion, doing bad things to each other. So there's all these pros and cons, and what's lost in there, is it true or I'm just so hesitant to say it doesn't matter that it's true. But then I have to ask why, and I think because it's just more of the risk that, yes, maybe for some people they may have personally a better result, but the odds of just achieving that great for everyone based on fictions is so low that chances are, if it's not real, it's going to create more harm than good in overall. But I don't know. I mean, certainly whether or not I think religion is real, I think it's played a huge role in bringing us to where we are today, right? I mean, there's a question of, it could be other way. Maybe without religion, society would have died out. up to now, or maybe without religion, it would be farther along than we are now. Who knows? Like we don't know because it hasn't happened, but we do know it's played a huge role in developing our society now. And it's either true or not true. And we have conflicting religions that each seem to have benefits. And that's why this is where he really came in this lecture. He said, it sort of drives him nuts, where he says, all these different theological, religious, worldviews are based a lot on these altered states of consciousness that produce different contradicting things. So the benefit of it may not have anything to do with what's real. This I think is where he's going, but
yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, just going into my pragmatism again is like there's a way in which you can think about beliefs not so much as their like portrayal of reality, but more so of like what capacities do they give for the organisms? Kind of like, okay, fins for an organism allows it to swim faster, or legs give them the ability to walk on land, things like that. You can think about beliefs or memes as these secondary capacities for people to, or like psychotechnologies that Vervake brings in. And through these psychotechnologies that can give us greater capacity to enact our own will or lesser capacity to enact our own will, or even like changing what will we're willing to enact. And I think there's a way in which you can test these beliefs, but like I said, like you pointed out, it's not testing whether or not they're true. It's just testing whether or not the environment that you're applying these beliefs provide to you the result that you're seeking from them. So, yeah.
And I think and the other thing is like I tend to think we have more in common than we have differences. I think we, like, if you're not religious, I'm not religious, but I tell myself my own stories that help me reconcile. And probably overall, there are some key differences, but if you take the average non-religious person, the average religious person, they're probably pretty similar within a certain society.
Yeah, that's the thing. There's still going to be these other aspects of them that they hold as being important. And you can still ground your kind of ethics somewhat on those as well. Like they care about family, they care about country, they care about well-being and healthiness and happiness too. It's like, these are all, it's not like I care about happiness and you care about making people unhappy. It's like, I care about happiness and also health and these other things as well. And you care about these other things maybe to a higher degree, or you see them as being more applicable to the situation than right now. And I also care about happiness. It's just that happiness isn't always achievable. So you have to like weigh out what are the ways in which we can get the stable society such that happiness could come forth, would be one way. Yeah. But all right. Yeah, we'll probably finish up there. Yeah, this was a great conversation. Thanks, Brett, and also Sumit for joining in, and anybody that's watching over this later on. You can join us on Discord. It's bevry.me/Discord, and we've got like our little chats that we have going on there, and we'll share links. And we also have our discussion forum. So if you want to bring forward a topic, you can go to discuss.bevry.me to do that. I'm on Twitter at writerjohnbuck, and Brett, I don't know if you want to plug anything.
Yeah, just Twitter at Pleasure of Doubt. And at some point I want to start a YouTube channel, but I haven't yet. So
cool. And that's the thing with Bevry. We're in the process of trying to like turn this into something more structuralized and formal so that more of these types of conversations can take place, not just from our neck of the woods, but also a lot of different topics that people can bring forward and really use to help them in their lives. So yeah, well, look forward to that. Or if you want to get involved with that, like I said, any of the links below, you're welcome to do so. So yeah.
And if you do watch this at all, put a comment in so we know it's not just us clicking on it to see if people actually like it, and share.
Yeah, just talking it off into the void. Yeah.
All
right.
Thanks, John.
Yeah.